Hey there, fellow knowledge seekers, and welcome back to Peak Intrigue, the show that takes you on a deep dive into the most fascinating realms of thought. Before we get started, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future episodes. Today, we're embarking on a pretty ambitious journey, folks. We're going to explore the world of Platonism, and trust me, this is a rabbit hole worth going down. We're actually going to take our time with this one. 20 episodes in total. Think of it as a philosophical odyssey.
What's really intriguing about Plato is that most people associate him with these lofty, abstract ideas, but we're going to discover a much more nuanced and, dare I say, human side to his philosophy.
Exactly. We're not just going to regurgitate a bunch of dusty old doctrines. Instead, we want to get to the heart of what makes Platonism a living, breathing way of thinking. And a good place to start is with the idea that Platonism is less about arriving at fixed conclusions and more about a method, a way of approaching philosophical inquiry. What do you think about that idea? What does it mean to have a philosophical method? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
That's a great question to kick things off, because one of the things that makes Plato so fascinating and so challenging is that he doesn't give us a neat, systematic presentation of his philosophy. Instead, he chooses to write in dialogues.
Right. So instead of just laying out his ideas in a straightforward way, we're thrown into these conversations, these debates between different characters. It can feel a bit like eavesdropping on a lively dinner party in ancient Athens.
And that's not by accident. The dialogue form is absolutely central to Plato's method. He's not just using it as a literary device. It reflects his understanding of how thinking itself actually works.
So the format itself is a clue to the content.
Precisely. Think about it. When we genuinely engage with an idea, we don't just passively absorb it. We question it, we challenge it, we test it against our own experiences and beliefs. And that process is often messy, full of twists and turns.
It's like a mental wrestling match.
Exactly. And that's what's going on in Plato's dialogues. We see these brilliant minds wrestling with some of the most fundamental questions about life, morality, knowledge, reality. And through this process, we as readers are invited to participate in that struggle.
Okay, so it's like we're not just reading about philosophy, we're actually doing philosophy.
Absolutely. And one of the key elements of this method is that Plato rarely gives us easy answers. In fact, many of his dialogues end in what's called aporia.
Aporia. Now, I know we have some philosophy buffs out there, but for those of us who need a refresher, what exactly does aporia mean?
It's a Greek word that signifies a state of perplexity, a sort of intellectual impasse, where we realize we don't have all the answers.
So instead of neatly tying everything up at the bow, he leaves us hanging.
He does, and that's part of his brilliance. By refusing to give us easy answers, he forces us to think for ourselves. He wants us to grapple with the questions, to wrestle with the complexities, and ultimately to come to our own conclusion.
You know, in a way that's much more empowering than just being handed a set of doctrines. It's like he's saying, don't just take my word for it. Go out there and discover the truth for yourself.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a lesson that's incredibly relevant today, wouldn't you say? In a world saturated with information, it's easy to fall into the trap of passive consumption. But Plato challenges us to be active learners, to engage critically with the ideas we encounter, and to never stop questioning.
This reminds me of something I've been thinking about a lot lately. It seems like in our modern world, we're often so focused on finding the right answer, the quick solution. But maybe the real value lies in embracing the questions, in being comfortable with uncertainty. What do you think, listeners? Are we too obsessed with finding definitive answers? Let us know in the comments.
I think that's a crucial insight, and it's something that's deeply embedded in Plato's approach. He understood that true knowledge isn't just about accumulating facts, but about cultivating a certain intellectual disposition, a willingness to question, to challenge, and to be open to new perspectives.
So it's not just about what we know, but how we think.
Exactly. And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Plato's dialogues, and that's the importance of form and style.
Okay, so we need to pay attention to the how as much as the what.
Absolutely. Think about it. Plato was a master of language. He could have presented his ideas in dry, technical treatises, but he chose the dialogue form. And he crafted these dialogues with incredible care, weaving in irony, humor, dramatic tension, even poetic imagery.
So it's like he's appealing to our emotions as well as our intellect.
Precisely. He understood that to truly grasp an idea, it has to resonate on multiple levels. It has to capture our imagination, spark our curiosity, and maybe even make us laugh along the way.
It's like he's turning philosophy into an art form.
And in a way, he is. He's showing us that philosophy isn't just a cold, abstract pursuit. It's a deeply human endeavor that involves our whole being.
This is giving me a whole new appreciation for Plato's work. It's not just about deciphering a set of doctrines. It's about entering into a dialogue with him, with his characters, and ultimately with ourselves.
And that's a dialogue that can continue to challenge and enrich us centuries later.
This is already getting pretty deep,
Yeah.
and we've only just scratched the surface. But before we get too carried away, I think it's a good time to pause and let our listeners catch their breath. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our Platonic journey. We've explored the idea that Platonism is a method, a way of thinking that involves questioning, challenging, and being open to new perspectives. We've also talked about the importance of the dialogue form and how Plato uses it to engage us, not just intellectually but also emotionally. What are your thoughts so far? Are you starting to see Plato in a new light? Share your insights in the comments below. And be sure to join us for part 2, where we'll delve deeper into the world of Platonic thought and its enduring legacy.
Welcome back to our exploration of Platonism. In the last part, we talked about how Plato's philosophy is really more of a method than a set of doctrines. He uses dialogues to engage us in this process of inquiry, and he deliberately leaves us with unanswered questions to encourage us to think for ourselves. Now, one of the most intriguing aspects of this method is its focus on something. That might seem a bit surprising at first. Wonder.
Wonder? You mean like a childlike sense of awe and curiosity?
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily think of that as the starting point for a rigorous philosophical system.
Well, for Plato, philosophy begins not with certainty, but with a sense of puzzlement, a recognition that there's so much we don't know. It's the sense of wonder that drives us to ask questions in the first place.
Okay, I can see that. When we're confronted with something new, something we don't understand, it sparks a desire to learn, to make sense of it.
Exactly. And this sense of wonder isn't just a starting point. It's something that we should cultivate. Throughout our philosophical journey, it's what keeps us open to new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of seeing the world.
So it's not just about accumulating knowledge. It's about maintaining a certain attitude, a certain openness to the mystery of existence.
Precisely. And this brings us to a really important point. Plato believed that this sense of wonder isn't just something we experience individually, it's something that's shared, something that connects us to other seekers of knowledge.
So philosophy is a communal activity.
Absolutely. Think about the dialogue form again. Plato isn't just presenting us with a series of monologues, he's showing us how knowledge emerges through conversation, through the exchange of ideas, through the challenge of different perspectives.
This makes me think about the importance of having intellectual mentors, or even just friends who are willing to engage in deep conversations and challenge our assumptions.
That's a great point. We all need those people in our lives who can help us see things from new angles, who can push us to think more deeply and more critically.
So we have this method that starts with wonder, that emphasizes dialogue and the importance of community. Where do we go from there? What are some of the key concepts or ideas that emerge from this approach?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. One of the central themes that runs through Plato's work is the idea of forms.
Forms. Okay, that sounds a bit abstract. Can you break that down for us?
Imagine you have a group of beautiful things. Say a beautiful painting, a beautiful piece of music, a beautiful person. What makes them all beautiful?
That's a good question. It's like there's some underlying essence of beauty that they all share, even though they're all different.
Exactly. And that essence for Plato is the form of beauty.
So there's this realm of perfect eternal forms that exist beyond the physical world.
That's the idea. And these forms aren't just limited to beauty. There are forms for all sorts of concepts, like justice, truth, goodness.
So these forms are like blueprints for the things we see in the physical world.
That's a good analogy. The things we see and experience in the physical world are just imperfect copies or reflections of these perfect forms.
This is starting to make my head spin a little bit. So there's this whole other realm of existence that we can't perceive with our senses. How do we even know it exists?
That's where things get really philosophical. Plato argued that we can access this realm through reason, through philosophical inquiry.
So it's like we have to use our minds to see beyond the physical world and grasp these deeper realities.
Exactly. And that's why philosophy for Plato is such an important pursuit. It's the way we can connect with these eternal truths, these unchanging realities that give meaning and order to the world.
Okay, I'm starting to get a glimpse of the power of this idea. But I have to admit, it's a lot to wrap my head around. What do you think, listeners? Are you starting to see the appeal of Plato's theory of forms? Is this a way of understanding the world that resonates with you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
And be sure to join us for part 3, where we'll explore how this idea of forms, this quest for knowledge, influenced one of Plato's most famous students, a guy you might have heard of, Aristotle.
Welcome back, fellow philosophy enthusiasts. I hope you've grabbed your thinking caps, because we're about to dive even deeper into the world of Plato in the last part. We explored this fascinating concept of forms, these eternal perfect blueprints that exist beyond the physical world and give shape and meaning to everything we see around us. It's a mind-bending idea, but also raises so many questions.
It certainly does. And perhaps one of the most intriguing questions is, how did Plato's students grapple with these ideas? Did they just accept them wholesale, or did they challenge and refine them in their own ways?
That's a great question. And speaking of students, we can't talk about Plato without talking about one of his most famous pupils, Aristotle. Now, Aristotle is often seen as sort of a philosophical rebel, someone who broke away from his teacher's ideas and forged his own path. But is that really an accurate picture?
It's a bit more complicated than that. You see, while Aristotle did develop his own distinct philosophical system, he was deeply influenced by Plato's ideas. In fact, you could say that Aristotle's philosophy is a response to Plato, a continuation of that same philosophical conversation we've been talking about.
Okay, so it's not so much a rebellion as a kind of evolution. But how did Aristotle take these abstract concepts like forms and apply them to the real world? He was known for being much more grounded in observation and empirical evidence, right?
That's right. Aristotle was deeply interested in the natural world, in studying plants and animals, in understanding how things work. But he didn't abandon Plato's focus on ultimate causes or the search for meaning. Instead, he sought to integrate those ideas into a more comprehensive understanding of reality.
So instead of seeing a sharp division between the world of forms and the world of experience, he tried to bridge that gap.
Exactly. For Aristotle, the forms weren't separate from the physical world. He saw them as immanent, as present within the things themselves. He believed that by studying the natural world carefully, we could discern the forms at work, guiding the development and behavior of all things.
So for Aristotle, the world around us isn't just a collection of random objects. It's a tapestry woven with purpose and meaning. And by observing and studying this tapestry, we can begin to unravel the deeper order of things. That's a pretty inspiring idea, wouldn't you say?
It certainly is, and it's an idea that has had a profound impact on Western thought. From science and philosophy to art and religion, Aristotle's emphasis on observation and empirical evidence helped lay the groundwork for the scientific method. And his focus on the interconnectedness of all things has influenced everything, from ecological thinking to systems theory.
Wow. So we're talking about a legacy that extends far beyond the walls of the academy. But if Aristotle was so influenced by Plato, what were some of the key areas where they differed?
One of the most significant differences was in their understanding of how we acquire knowledge. Plato, as we've discussed, believed that true knowledge comes from reason, from accessing the realm of forms. Aristotle, on the other hand, emphasized the role of experience. He believed that we gain knowledge through our senses, through observation and interaction with the world.
So it's not an either-or situation. It's more about a balance between reason and experience.
Exactly. Aristotle recognized the importance of both. He believed that we need our senses to gather information about the world, but we also need reason to make sense of that information, to organize it into a coherent understanding of reality.
This makes you think about the different ways we learn, whether it's through books, lectures, hands-on experiences, or even just conversations with others. It seems like we need all of these approaches to get a complete picture of things. What do you think, listeners? Do you tend to lean more towards reason or experience in your own learning process? Let us know in the comments below.
And while you're pondering that question, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've covered in this episode. We began by exploring the idea that Platonism is a method, a way of approaching philosophical inquiry that emphasizes dialogue wonder and a willingness to question. We then delved into the concept of forms, these eternal blueprints that exist beyond the physical world. And finally, we examined how Aristotle, one of Plato's most famous students, built upon and refined these ideas, creating a philosophical system that sought to integrate the realm of forms with the world of experience.
This has been an incredible journey through the foundations of Western philosophy, and I hope it's inspired you to continue exploring these ideas on your own.
Remember, philosophy is not just about studying the great thinkers of the past. It's about engaging with the big questions, about cultivating a curious and critical mind, and about finding your own path to understanding the world and your place within it.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Plato and Aristotle, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Peak Intrigue for more mind-expanding explorations. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking. and keep the flame of curiosity burning bright. Welcome back to Peak Intrigue, everybody. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future deep dives just like this.
Always a pleasure to be back, ready for another journey through some fascinating ideas.
Definitely. And you know what's really exciting? This is already part 2 of our 20-part series.
Wow, 20 parts. We've got a lot to cover.
Yeah, we've got a real intellectual adventure ahead of us. And for today's deep dive, we're stepping into the world of one of history's most influential thinkers.
You're talking about Aristotle, right?
Exactly, Aristotle, a name that's practically synonymous with logic, reason, and knowledge.
And whose ideas have had an incredible impact for over 2,000 years.
It's unbelievable. To guide us through his world, we've got 2 great sources.
What are we diving into?
We're looking at a YouTube video called 7 Life Lessons from Aristotle. It's from the Philosophies for Life channel.
Sounds interesting.
And we're also going to be referencing a really thought-provoking article called What Does Being an Aristotelian Really Mean?
So we've got a mix of both accessible wisdom and a deeper academic exploration.
That's right. Get ready, because we're about to explore concepts that have shaped Western thought for centuries.
Now, before we get into the specifics, I think it's important to pause for a moment and appreciate just how significant Aristotle was.
I agree. Sometimes we forget how long ago he lived.
Imagine, he lived from 384 to 322 BC.
Centuries before our modern era.
And yet, his ideas still resonate with us today.
It's incredible, and you know what's even more incredible is that he was a student of Plato.
Plato, another giant in the world of philosophy.
And then he went on to become the tutor of Alexander the Great.
Think about that for a second. From shaping philosophical thought to influencing a young king who would build a vast empire, that's quite a range.
It really is. And get this, we only have about a third of his original writings left.
It's almost impossible to imagine how much knowledge has been lost to time.
But even with just a fraction of his work, we have a wealth of insights into logic, ethics, politics, even biology.
It seems like he wrote about almost everything. Truly a polymath.
He was. So before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you all. What comes to mind when you hear the name Aristotle? Share your thoughts with us in the comments.
It's fascinating how certain names become so closely associated with certain fields.
Absolutely. So let's dive into those 7 life lessons from Aristotle, starting with this quote from the video. To run away from trouble is a form of cowardice. The suicide braves death, not for some noble object, but to escape some ill.
Wow, that's quite a powerful statement. Really gets you thinking.
It does, doesn't it? No sugarcoating there, just straight to the point. But he's not just saying to grin and bear it, is he?
No, I think there's a deeper message there about learning from our struggles.
Right. He's emphasizing that facing challenges, working through difficulties, can ultimately lead to growth, to moral development.
It's the idea that difficult experiences, while painful, can teach us valuable lessons and refine our character.
So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly. But it's important to note that Aristotle wasn't advocating for a life of constant struggle. He acknowledged the importance of knowing when a situation is beyond our control.
Right, knowing when to let go.
And finding peace and acceptance.
So it's about choosing your battles wisely. Which challenges to face head on and which to accept and move on from.
I think that's a really important distinction. A good example of this is Alexander the Great, who, remember, was Aristotle's student.
Oh yeah, the video mentioned that.
Imagine facing an army with 200 elephants.
200 elephants? That's terrifying.
It's almost unbelievable, but that's the challenge Alexander faced. And he drew upon the courage he learned from Aristotle and achieved victory.
It makes you think, what difficult problems have you faced in your life? Did you choose to run, or did you face them head on? Share your experiences in the comments below.
We all face those moments where we feel overwhelmed, but I think Aristotle's reminder to find courage in the face of adversity is something we can all learn from.
Absolutely. So, lesson 1 from Aristotle. Don't shy away from problems, learn from them. Now, on to lesson number 2, which is all about balance.
Golden mean, right?
That's the one. Here's the quote. Virtue is the golden mean between 2 vices, the one of excess and the other of deficiency.
One of Aristotle's most famous concepts, and for good reason.
It's so applicable to everyday life.
He's saying that every virtue exists as a point of balance between 2 extremes.
So it's not about going all in on one side or the other, but finding that sweet spot in the middle.
Exactly, like with courage, for example.
Okay, so walk us through that.
Well, courage is the virtue, right? On one side, you have cowardice, the deficiency of courage, where fear prevents action. But then on the other side, you have recklessness, the excess of courage, acting impulsively without considering consequences.
So true courage lies in finding that balance.
That's the golden mean. And it applies to so many other things in life.
Like with food, you can have too much, which is unhealthy, but you also need enough to thrive.
Precisely. The golden mean is about finding that balance, whether it's with our time, our energy, even our emotions.
Right, like anger. You don't want to be completely apathetic, but you also don't want to be consumed by rage.
That's a great example. The video talks about how finding that balance is essential for achieving a sense of well-being and happiness.
But how do we actually find that golden mean in our own lives? It feels like we're constantly being pulled in different directions.
Aristotle believed that it takes self-reflection, practice, and what he called practical wisdom.
Practical wisdom. That sounds pretty deep.
It's about understanding our own tendencies, our strengths, and our weaknesses, and then making conscious choices that lead us towards balance rather than extremes.
It sounds like it takes a real effort to cultivate that kind of balance.
It does, but Aristotle believed it was crucial for living a truly fulfilling life. Now, I'd love to hear from you all. What are some areas in your life where finding the golden mean is a challenge? Let us know down in the comments.
I think we can all relate to the struggle of finding balance in at least one area of our lives.
Yeah. It's definitely an ongoing process, a constant learning curve. Okay, moving on to life lesson number 3 from the video. This one really resonated with me. It's all about maintaining dignity, no matter what kind of curveballs life throws your way.
I completely agree. This lesson is powerful. It reminds me of the quote from the video. The ideal man bears the accidents of life with dignity and grace, making the best of circumstances.
It's so true, right?
Wow.
Life can be unpredictable. But even when things get tough, Aristotle suggests that we should strive for that inner strength, that grace, that allows us to navigate the challenges with composure.
Definitely. I think the video brings up a perfect anecdote to highlight this. It's a story about Aristotle himself facing some serious adversity and how he handled it with incredible strength. After Alexander the Great died, there was a lot of negativity directed towards Aristotle.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
He was actually accused of impiety, a very serious charge back then. Wow. I can't imagine being exiled from your own city just because of your ideas. That's a lot to deal with.
It was a truly unjust situation, and ultimately Aristotle was forced to flee Athens. But even in the face of such a difficult situation, he left with dignity.
So how did he respond?
He's known to have said, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy."
Meaning that he wouldn't let them stop him from pursuing his passion, his purpose.
Exactly. He didn't let the negativity or unfairness break his spirit. He chose to stay true to his commitment to philosophy.
It's so inspiring. I think this really emphasizes the importance of having a guiding principle or a noble goal in life, something that helps us rise above the petty criticisms or setbacks that we inevitably face.
Absolutely. When we have something bigger than ourselves, something we're striving for, it can give us the strength to persevere, to stay focused on what truly matters.
It's like an anchor that keeps us grounded when things get stormy.
I love that analogy. Now, this brings up an interesting question for our listeners. What is a noble goal that you're working towards? How does it help you to navigate the challenges that life throws your way? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them down in the comments.
I think we can all learn from each other's experiences and find inspiration in shared goals. Okay, on to life lesson number 4. And this one's especially relevant in today's world, I think. The quote from the video is, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it."
Such a profound statement, isn't it? It speaks volumes about open-mindedness and the willingness to engage with ideas that might be different from our own.
It's a real challenge sometimes. It's so easy to get caught up in our own beliefs, our own little echo chambers. But Aristotle is reminding us that true learning, true growth, requires us to step outside of those comfort zones.
Exactly. And the video points out that good listening is so important in this process. Not just passively hearing someone out, but actively engaging with their ideas, even if you don't agree with them.
That sounds like a real skill, to be able to listen to an opposing viewpoint without shutting down or getting defensive.
It definitely is. And the video suggests that it involves 3 key components: virtue, character, and education.
Okay, so break those down for us. What did Aristotle mean by those terms in this context?
Well, by virtue, he meant recognizing the inherent worth of the other person, giving them the space to express themselves fully. Character refers to managing your own emotional reactions, even when you're being challenged. And education equips you with the knowledge and critical thinking skills necessary to engage in a truly meaningful way.
So it's not about being passive or simply tolerating someone else's opinion. It's about actively participating in a thoughtful and respectful dialogue.
Exactly. The video uses a very timely example to illustrate this. It talks about engaging with a climate change denier.
That's a tough one for sure. It's easy to shut down a conversation like that.
It can be. But remember Aristotle's quote, he would argue that even in a charged situation like that, there's potential for learning. You might reject 99% of what the person is saying.
Right, you don't have to agree with everything.
But the effort to find even that 1% truth can challenge you to sharpen your own arguments and maybe even see the issue from a new angle.
So disagreement can become an opportunity for growth, not just a battle to be won.
That's the key takeaway. Have you ever surprised yourself by learning something valuable from someone you strongly disagreed with?
I have to admit, it has happened a few times, and it's always a humbling experience. It reminds me how important it is to stay open-minded, to keep learning from those around us.
I couldn't agree more. Now, let's move on to life lesson number 5, which focuses on friendships.
Friendships are so important, aren't they?
They really are, and Aristotle believed that choosing our friends wisely is crucial. He famously said, "A friend to all is a friend to none."
That's an interesting thought. It suggests that true friendship is about quality, not quantity.
Exactly. He wasn't advocating for being antisocial or exclusive, but rather for being discerning about the relationships we cultivate.
The video mentions that Aristotle actually identified 3 types of friendship: those based on utility, those based on pleasure, and those based on virtue.
Right. Let's break those down a little further. Friendships of utility are those that serve a practical purpose.
Like colleagues at work, or people you might exchange favors with.
Exactly. Those relationships can be beneficial, but they often don't have the same depth as other types of friendships.
Then there are friendships based on pleasure. Those are the people we enjoy spending time with because we share common interests or hobbies.
Those relationships can bring a lot of joy into our lives, but they can also be fleeting, especially if those shared interests change over time.
Right. And finally, there are friendships based on virtue.
These, according to Aristotle, are the rarest and most valuable kind. They're built on a foundation of shared values, mutual respect, and a genuine desire for each other's growth and well-being.
These are the friends who challenge us to be better people, who are there for us through thick and thin.
Exactly. Aristotle believed that these types of friendships take time and effort to develop, but they're essential for a truly fulfilling life. He even suggested that people make a list of their core values to help them find potential friends who share those same principles.
It's like having a compass that can guide you towards the kinds of relationships that bring meaning and depth to your life.
I love that analogy. So, what qualities do you value most in your closest friends? Let us know down in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, moving on to life lesson number 6. And this one is about the importance of truth, even when it's challenging.
This one is interesting because it touches on Aristotle's relationship with his mentor, Plato. The video quotes him saying, "Plato is dear to me, but dearer still is truth."
That's a powerful statement. It shows that Aristotle valued intellectual honesty and independent thinking, even when it meant disagreeing with someone he greatly admired.
And they did have some significant philosophical differences, didn't they?
They did, on some key issues. For example, they had differing views on the theory of forms, a central concept in Plato's philosophy.
Right. Plato believed in a realm of perfect, unchanging forms existing beyond our physical world. But Aristotle was more focused on studying the world as we experience it through our senses.
Another area they diverged on was their approach to ethics. Plato's ethics were rooted in the idea of an absolute good, while Aristotle believed ethics were more situational, more contextual.
It's fascinating to see how these two brilliant minds could approach the same questions from such different perspectives. But I think Aristotle's statement highlights the importance of prioritizing truth, even when it means disagreeing with people we respect.
It's about having the courage to question assumptions, to think for ourselves, even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. So I ask our listeners, when was the last time you had to stand up for a truth that was unpopular or uncomfortable? Share your stories in the comments.
Those are the moments that really test our convictions. All right, on to the final life lesson from the video, life lesson number 7. This one's all about maximizing our potential, reaching for our best selves. And it all comes down to continuous learning.
It's such a relevant theme these days, isn't it? This idea that we should never stop learning, never stop growing.
It's everywhere you look.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how far back this idea goes Aristotle really emphasized the importance of learning for a fulfilling life.
He did, and he had a powerful way of putting it. He said, happiness is not God-sent, but comes as a result of virtue and some process of learning or training.
So it's not about just waiting for happiness to happen to us. It's about actively pursuing it through virtue and knowledge.
Absolutely. And it's important to clarify that when he talks about happiness, he's not talking about fleeting moments of pleasure. He's referring to a much deeper concept called eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia, that's a new one.
It's a Greek word, often translated as happiness, but it's much richer than that. It encompasses the idea of flourishing, of realizing your full potential, of becoming the best version of yourself.
So it's about aligning our actions with our true purpose and striving for excellence in everything we do.
Exactly. And Aristotle believed that a big part of this is identifying your talents and finding work that brings you joy.
It's not just about finding any job to pay the bills. It's about finding your calling, something that truly ignites your passion.
And that calling might change over time. That's why lifelong learning is so crucial. It allows us to adapt and continue growing.
The journey never ends, does it? There's always something new to learn.
Exactly. So I have a question for everyone listening. What steps are you taking to continuously learn and grow? What are you curious about? Share your thoughts with us in the comments.
We're always so inspired by hearing about other people's learning journeys. Now, we've been focusing on these 7 life lessons from the YouTube video, which is a great starting point. But the article, What Does Being an Aristotelian Really Mean?, takes us a bit deeper into the overall methodology behind Aristotle's thinking.
The article delves into a concept called phronesis, often translated as practical wisdom. It's a central part of Aristotle's ethical and political thought.
Practical wisdom. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
What exactly does it mean?
Well, phronesis really emphasizes context and experience. It's about making sound judgments in specific situations, not just applying abstract rules without considering the nuances.
So it's about being adaptable, responding to the complexities of real-life situations.
Precisely. And this contrasts with the idea of searching for absolute universal laws. Like the ones we find in mathematics, Aristotle actually saw ethics as being more similar to medicine than to math.
Really? How so?
He drew an interesting analogy. He pointed out that both medicine and ethics involve addressing ailments.
Okay, I see where he's going with this. In medicine, you treat ailments of the body.
Right. And in ethics, you address ailments of the soul, but both require a balance of theoretical knowledge and practical experience.
It's not enough to just know the rules.
Yeah.
You have to know how to apply them effectively in real-life situations.
Exactly. Just like a doctor needs to understand medical theory but also tailor their treatment to the specific needs of each patient, someone practicing ethical decision-making needs to understand the principles but also apply them thoughtfully to each unique situation.
It's a holistic approach, considering all the factors and making choices that lead to a good life.
That's the essence of Aristotelian thought. Embracing complexity, seeking wisdom through experience and reason, and striving for personal growth.
So to answer the question posed by the article, what does being an Aristotelian really mean? It's about living thoughtfully, acting virtuously, and never stopping the pursuit of knowledge and growth.
And I think that's a message that resonates just as strongly today as it did over 2,000 years ago.
Absolutely. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the wisdom of Aristotle. His insights are truly timeless. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Peak Intrigue for more thought-provoking discussions. Be sure to leave your thoughts on Aristotle and those 7 life lessons in the comments. We'll see you next time for another philosophical adventure. All right, Peak Intrigue listeners, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to explore something that might change your life?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love that energy.
Yeah.
And by the way, big thanks to all of you who liked and subscribed to the channel.
Yes, thank you.
Your support means the world, and it helps us bring you more of these deep dives.
It really does.
So keep those likes and subscribes coming. Tell a friend, too, right?
Spread the word.
All right, so we are on part 3 of 20 in this series, which is crazy.
I know, it's flown by.
It really has. And today, we are diving into a topic that's been requested for a while now, Stoicism.
Stoicism, yes.
We're cracking open the Little Book of Stoicism by Jonas Salzgiver.
Excellent book.
It is a good one. It's really accessible, I think, for people who are new to Stoicism.
Yeah, it's a great introduction.
So Stoicism, it's about finding happiness and resilience in a world that, well, let's be honest,
It's a crazy world.
it can be pretty chaotic sometimes. So I'm excited to have our expert here to guide us through the twists and turns of Stoic wisdom. What do we dive it into first?
Well, before we jump into the really practical stuff, the tools and techniques, I think it's important to just take a step back and answer the basic question.
Yeah.
What is Stoicism?
Right.
And why should anyone care?
Yeah, good point. It's an ancient philosophy, right?
Yeah.
But like, how does this stuff from, togas and scrolls apply to our modern lives?
Right.
Filled with deadlines and social media and just all the things.
Well, you might be surprised to hear that it's more relevant now than ever.
Okay.
I mean, just think about it. Our world is filled with distractions and pressures and uncertainty.
Oh, yeah?
Stoicism gives us this framework for navigating all of that.
Hmm.
And this book boils it down to two major promises I think anyone can get behind.
Okay.
First, it can help you live a happier life.
Sign me up.
Right?
I mean, who doesn't want that?
Exactly. And second, it can help you build this incredible resilience
Okay.
to face whatever curveballs life throws your way.
All right, I'm already intrigued. Sign me up for more happiness and resilience. But before we get too deep, this book introduces us to some pretty fascinating figures from history, like these Stoic superstars. I have to admit, I'm picturing dudes in togas debating philosophy in some ancient marketplace.
Well, there were definitely togas involved,
Okay.
but you might be surprised by the diversity of these Stoic thinkers and their lives.
Okay.
Like we have Zeno of Citium. He went from being a shipwrecked merchant to the founder of Stoicism.
Whoa, okay, wait a minute. A shipwrecked merchant?
Yeah.
Talk about a career pivot.
You know what they say when one door closes?
Another one opens.
Another one opens, or in this case, sinks.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
From shipwrecks to philosophy. Okay, who else is in this Stoic Hall of Fame?
We've got Seneca the Younger. He was a wealthy playwright and advisor to an emperor Nero.
Okay.
Sort of like having Shakespeare as your life coach.
Yeah.
And get this, we have Musonius Rufus, an early advocate for women's rights.
Wait, a feminist Stoic?
Hmm.
That's not what I was expecting.
It's true. The Stoics were ahead of their time in many ways. Musonius Rufus, for example, believed that women should have equal access to education and should have a voice in society.
This is already blowing my mind. Yeah, okay, keep going. Who else is there?
We also meet Epictetus, a formerly enslaved person who became a renowned teacher.
Wow.
He even taught an emperor.
Really?
And of course, we can't forget Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, who was also a philosopher. Talk about a busy schedule.
Yeah, that is a busy schedule. So we've got this shipwreck survivor turned philosopher, a playwright advising emperors, an early feminist, a formerly enslaved teacher.
Yeah.
Wow, what a lineup. It's fascinating how their personal stories connect to their philosophies.
Absolutely. These weren't just armchair philosophers. They were living, breathing examples of their own teachings. They faced exile loss, the pressures of running an empire, and they used Stoic principles to navigate those challenges.
Okay, all right. I'm hooked on the historical drama, but let's get practical. How do these ancient ideas actually help us live better lives today?
Yeah, let's get practical.
Listeners, I want to hear from you. Which of these Stoic figures sounds most interesting to you, and why? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, this book uses a really clever metaphor to explain the core principles of Stoicism. It's called the Stoic Happiness Triangle.
I love this metaphor.
It is a good one. So each corner of the triangle represents a key principle, which makes it super easy to grasp. What's the first corner?
The first corner is living with arete.
Okay, living with arete. It sounds a bit complicated. What does that even mean?
It sounds complicated, but it's really about striving to be your best self in every moment.
So kind of like leveling up your life like in a video game.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about aligning your actions with virtue.
Okay.
The Stoics had these 4 cardinal virtues:
Okay.
wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control.
Got it.
So imagine applying wisdom to your career decisions,
Okay.
justice to your relationships, and courage to your personal challenges. It's about tapping into your full potential in every area of your life.
I'm already feeling more virtuous just thinking about it. Okay, corner number 2 of the Stoic Happiness Triangle.
This one is all about focusing on what you can control.
Okay, focusing on what you can control.
This is a game changer, really. It's about recognizing that we can't control everything that happens to us. The weather, other people's actions, the stock market, you get the idea.
Oh, tell me about it. I can barely control what I eat for breakfast, let alone the chaos of the world.
Exactly. But here's the empowering part.
Okay.
What we can control
Yes.
are our own thoughts, judgments, and reactions to whatever life throws our way.
So instead of stressing about things I can't change, I should focus on how I respond to them.
Precisely. Let's say you're stuck in traffic and you're late for an important meeting. You can't magically teleport your car.
Nope.
But you can choose how you react. You can fume and fret, which will just make you more stressed. Or you can use that time to listen to a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
practice some mindfulness, or even just enjoy a moment of quiet.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm definitely guilty of letting things outside my control get to me way too often. Okay, so we've covered living with arete and focusing on what you can control. What's the third corner of this triangle of happiness?
The third corner is all about taking responsibility.
Okay, responsibility. I can already feel my inner teenager rolling their eyes.
Uh-huh.
But I'm guessing the Stoics meant something deeper than remembering to take out the trash, right?
Right. It's about recognizing that our choices, not external events, are ultimately the source of our happiness and fulfillment. It's about owning your life, even the messy parts.
So if I'm constantly complaining about my job, but doing nothing to change it,
Yeah,
that's a lack of responsibility.
that's a great example. It's easy to blame external factors for our unhappiness, our jobs, our relationships, the government. But the Stoics would say that true freedom comes from recognizing the power we have to choose our responses and shape our lives.
So instead of saying, my job makes me miserable,
Right.
I could say, I'm choosing to stay in this job and it's making me unhappy. What can I do to change that?
Exactly. It shifts your perspective from feeling like a victim to feeling empowered to make choices. You become the author of your own story.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But we all know that life isn't always sunshine and roses.
That's true.
How does Stoicism help us deal with those inevitable negative emotions, the anger, the anxiety, the fear?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we'll dive into in more detail in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, I can't wait. Listeners, I want to know, what's your biggest struggle when it comes to dealing with difficult emotions?
Yeah, let us know.
Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore some practical Stoic techniques for taming those inner villains.
You got it.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, so we're back and ready to tackle those negative emotions.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
You know those feelings of anger, anxiety, fear?
Oh, yeah. I know them well.
We all do. They're part of the human experience. But the Stoics had this fascinating perspective on them.
Yeah.
They believe that these emotions actually stem from our judgments about what's truly good or bad.
So it's not the external event itself that makes us upset, but our interpretation of it.
Exactly. For example, let's say someone cuts you off in traffic.
Oh, yeah. I've been there.
The Stoic approach isn't to pretend you're not annoyed.
Okay.
It's about examining that annoyance
Okay.
and asking yourself, is this person's driving truly bad, or am I just attaching a judgment to it because it inconvenienced me?
Whoa, okay. That's making me think. So instead of getting all road ragey,
Yeah.
I could choose to think maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're rushing to the hospital, maybe they just made a mistake.
That's the Stoic mindset. You're not denying your emotions,
Right.
but you're choosing to view the situation through a different lens.
I like that. I like that a lot. This is reminding me of something we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Focusing on what you can control.
Absolutely.
I can't control other people's driving, but I can control how I react to it.
Exactly. And you know, the Stoics believe there's this gap between a stimulus like someone cutting you off
Okay.
and your response like yelling obscenities.
Oh, yeah, that gap can be dangerous.
It can. And they talked about this idea of paying attention, or
Okay.
prosoche. The key is to step into that gap
Okay.
and choose a more reasoned, virtuous response.
So it's like creating space to pause before react, like hitting the mental pause button.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It takes practice.
Oh, for sure.
But imagine the freedom that comes from not being ruled by your emotions, from having that control.
Right, like being in the driver's seat of your own mind.
Exactly. And this book gives us some amazing tools to actually put this into practice.
Okay, let's get to the tools. I'm ready.
Are you ready to dive into some practical Stoic techniques?
Absolutely. Listeners, get your notebooks ready.
Yes, take notes.
One of the practices this book talks about is negative visualization. I have to admit, the name sounds a bit negative.
It does sound a bit counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually a powerful technique for building resilience and appreciating what we have.
Okay, explain this one to me because I'm not sure I get it.
So it's about intentionally imagining things going wrong,
What?
like losing your job, a loved one getting sick, experiencing a financial setback, whatever your fears might be.
Wait, so I'm supposed to sit here and conjure up all the worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
Isn't that just going to make me more anxious?
It seems that way, but here's the twist. By contemplating these potential misfortunes, we mentally prepare ourselves for challenges. It's like a mental fire drill. If you've already thought through how you might handle a difficult situation, you'll be less likely to panic if it actually happens.
Okay, I kind of get it. It's like mentally inoculating yourself against future stress.
Exactly. And here's the other benefit of negative visualization.
Okay.
It helps us appreciate what we have right now. By imagining the possibility of losing something precious, our health, our loved ones, even our material possessions, we become more grateful for their presence in our lives.
That makes sense. It reminds me of that saying, don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
By thinking about the bigger picture, the
Yeah.
potential for real loss,
Yeah.
those everyday annoyances seem much less significant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about putting things in perspective and focusing on what truly matters.
Okay. Negative visualization.
Mm.
I'm adding that to my mental toolkit. What else we got?
Well, let's talk about another practice that sounds a little intimidating at first.
Okay.
Voluntary discomfort.
Voluntary discomfort. That sounds kind of unpleasant. Why would I want to do that?
I know, right? It's about intentionally putting yourself in situations that are slightly uncomfortable
Okay.
to build your mental and physical resilience.
Give me an example.
So like taking a cold shower,
Oh, I know about that one.
or fasting for a day, or even just choosing to walk instead of drive when it's a bit chilly outside.
Okay, I see. So it's like giving your comfort zone a little nudge.
Exactly. By embracing discomfort in small doses, you build your ability to handle challenges when they come up unexpectedly.
That makes sense. It's like training for life's obstacles.
Right. And you know what's interesting about this practice? It also helps you appreciate the good things in life even more. Like after you take a cold shower, that hot cup of coffee tastes even better.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Okay, voluntary discomfort. I'm willing to give it a try. What else do we have?
Well, we've talked about negative visualization and voluntary discomfort, but there's another practice I want to mention that I think is essential for incorporating Stoicism into daily life.
Okay.
The Stoic morning routine.
Ooh, a morning routine.
Mhm.
I love a good morning routine.
Yeah.
This is a Stoic twist on this.
It's all about starting your day with intention and purpose.
Okay, I'm listening.
So before you jump into the hustle and bustle of your day, take a few moments to reflect on Stoic principles.
Like what?
You could read a passage from Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
Right.
Or journal about what you're grateful for.
Hmm?
Or even just visualize yourself navigating the day's challenges with wisdom and courage.
I love that. It's like setting the tone for the day ahead.
Exactly. It's about priming your mind for resilience and virtue.
Okay, the Stoic morning routine. I'm definitely adding that to my to-do list.
So we've talked about a lot of practical techniques here. Negative visualization, voluntary discomfort, the Stoic morning routine.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up this part of our deep dive?
There is actually one more Stoic practice that I think is super relevant to our modern lives.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
It's called eliminating the non-essential.
Eliminating the non-essential. Okay, I like the sound of that already. I feel like my life is full of non-essential things.
Right? It's all about decluttering, not just our closets, but our minds.
Okay.
You know, the Stoics would be appalled by our social media feeds and 247 news cycles.
Oh, yeah, they would not be fans.
They believed that true peace and happiness come from focusing on what truly matters. Our values, our character, our relationships.
So it's about taking out the mental trash. Those unnecessary worries, desires, and distractions that just clutter our minds and steal our energy. Exactly. Imagine your mind is like a garden. You wouldn't let weeds run rampant and choke out the beautiful flowers and plants you've carefully cultivated, right? It's
Yeah.
the same with our thoughts. We need to be mindful of what we allow to take root in our minds.
So instead of, doom scrolling through social media or stressing about things I can't control,
Yeah.
I could choose to spend that time reading a book, having a meaningful conversation with a friend, or just enjoying the present moment.
That's the Stoic approach. It's about prioritizing the essential and letting go of the rest. The Stoics believed that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in our own inner resources, our wisdom, our courage, our self-control.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to revisit something we talked about earlier, that idea that it's our judgments, not external events themselves, that cause us to suffer. It's so easy to forget that in the heat of the moment.
It is.
But the Stoics had this ingenious concept called the reserve clause to help us navigate that tricky terrain.
The reserve clause.
Yes, it's a good one.
So what's the reserve clause all about? It's like a little asterisk to your intentions. A gentle reminder that fate permitting things might unfold a little differently than you planned.
So instead of saying, I'm going to ace this job interview,
Right.
a Stoic might say, I'm going to prepare thoroughly and do my best in this interview, but I also accept that the final decision isn't entirely up to me.
Exactly. You're essentially saying if the universe aligns.
Okay, I like that. It takes the pressure off, right?
It does. You're acknowledging that there are factors beyond your control, and that's okay.
It's like saying, I'm going to put my heart and soul into this project, but I'm also open to the possibility that it might take a different direction than I initially envisioned.
Precisely. And here's the beautiful paradox. By accepting the possibility of things not going your way, you actually increase your chances of success.
How so?
Because when you're not attached to a specific outcome, you're more resilient, more adaptable, and more open to new possibilities.
That's such a mind shift. It's
Yeah.
like surrendering to the flow of life while still paddling your canoe in the direction you want to go. Listeners, have you ever tried using the reserve clause in your own life? Let us know in the comments. Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. From the Stoic happiness triangle to negative visualization, voluntary discomfort, the reserve clause, and eliminating the non-essential materials. We've explored some incredibly powerful tools for living a happier, more resilient, and more fulfilling life.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I want to emphasize one key point. Stoicism isn't just a set of rules or beliefs. It's a way of life. It's a continuous journey of self-discovery and growth.
Absolutely. It's about showing up every day and striving to be your best self, to face challenges with courage and wisdom, and to find peace and fulfillment amidst the chaos of the world.
So what will you take away from this deep dive? What Stoic practice will you try? What wisdom will you carry with you? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to Peak Intrigue for more deep dives into fascinating topics. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking wisdom. Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive, where we, as always, dig into your source material and try to pull out the most interesting ideas. Today, we're going to be looking at this.
Oh, wow.
Epicureanism, an ancient guide to modern well-being, a dissertation by Toby Sherman.
Very cool.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about how can a philosophy from ancient Greece help us live better lives today
Right.
in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, Sherman kind of starts by saying,
Yeah.
you know what? We all kind of have a sense of what well-being is. Like, it's one of those things that's sort of self-evident.
Right. We all want to be well off. We all want to...
Yeah, but it's actually really hard to define.
It is really hard to define.
Like when you actually try to put it into words.
Yeah.
So he talks about these two different approaches that people take. One is called normative adequacy, where you're trying to kind of
Right.
shove your definition of well-being into a pre-existing moral framework.
Like some sort of religious or...
Yeah.
Exactly. Or philosophical
It's just,
pre-existing.
Framework. And the other one is
Sort of, yeah.
what he calls, and what we'll be using in this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
is descriptive accuracy. And that basically is saying, okay, instead of imposing this
Right.
kind of preconceived notion of well-being, let's just look at how people actually experience. Like, what does it actually feel like
Exactly.
to feel good? Like, what does that mean in a practical sense?
Yeah. So
Okay.
looking at it through the lens of what actually, matches up with people's everyday experience.
Yeah.
Of what feels good and what feels bad.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to fit it into a pre-existing box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is what's so cool about Epicureanism, right? Is it's not just an abstract philosophical theory. It's really kind of a
It's a system.
system for, yeah,
Almost a guidebook to
Yeah.
navigate the world and, experience well-being.
totally. So that brings us to the most common misconception, I think, about Epicureanism.
Right.
When people hear Epicurean, they think of someone who's just indulging in
Exactly. Eat, drink, and be merry.
all their desire.
The stereotype, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The person who's just, pursuing pleasure at all costs.
Yeah, just like constant partying and
Yeah, it's just like
excess. Yeah.
excess, no self-control.
Yeah, but is that accurate?
I mean, not really. Epicurus, actually,
Okay.
did believe that pleasure is the ultimate good, but he was very specific about the kinds of pleasures that contribute to true well-being.
Oh, okay.
So he differentiated between two types of pleasure,
Okay.
kinetic pleasure and what's called katastematic pleasure. Kinetic pleasure is more like the kind of pleasure that we experience when we satisfy a craving. So like you're thirsty, you drink water, that feeling of satisfaction, or you're hungry, you eat food, that feeling of satisfaction. Those are kinetic pleasures.
Right. So very much tied to like fulfilling some need or craving that you have.
Exactly, yeah. And it's like almost a feeling of like relief or like,
Interesting. Okay.
you were missing something and now you have it.
Oh.
Katastematic pleasure is more like a state of being free from pain or disturbance. So it's not so much about like chasing highs, but more like the absence of lows, right? Like imagine a state of just like deep contentment
Yeah.
where you're not really craving anything,
Right.
where you're not troubled by anxieties or worries. You're just like
Oh, wow.
at peace.
That sounds amazing. But is that
That's the goal.
but is that even possible?
Right. It's a tall order.
I mean, in like the modern world where there's just like constant stimulation.
Right. We're constantly bombarded with.
Yeah. And new desires kind of popping up all the time.
Exactly. Exactly. So, do you think, and let us know down in the comments, what do you guys think? Do you think it's possible to be truly happy just by having no pain or unmet desires?
Right.
Or do you think there's more to it than that?
Yeah. Interesting question for everyone out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where Epicurus' atomic theory kind of comes in,
Oh, okay.
So he believed that everything in the universe is made up of atoms. These tiny, tiny little particles that are constantly in motion, colliding and combining in different ways.
Yeah.
And so what this means is that change is just like a fundamental aspect of reality, right?
Wow.
Everything is in flux. Nothing is permanent. And our desires, too, are constantly changing,
Oh.
arising and disappearing as our circumstances change.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, we definitely live in a world of constant change, like information overload.
Yeah,
There's always a new, iPhone coming out.
Exactly.
New product, new social media.
Always something new to want, And
Yeah.
so you're always kind of chasing after that next thing. It's like that hedonic treadmill.
Right.
Yeah. And so this is why Epicurus believed that certain types of desires
Oh, interesting.
are more likely to lead to frustration and unhappiness.
Oh, okay.
So he categorized desires into 3 types.
Okay.
Natural and necessary, natural but unnecessary, and then unnatural and empty.
Okay, let's break those down.
Yeah. So natural and necessary desires, those are the desires that are just essential for our survival.
Okay.
So like food, water, shelter.
The basics.
Yeah, the basics. You need those things to live.
Right.
And then we have natural but unnecessary desires.
Okay.
Those are desires that are still like rooted in our biology, right? But they go beyond those like basic survival needs.
Okay.
So think of like luxury foods or like elaborate clothing or like specific.
Like, I need this very particular kind of water.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Or like, a specific preference in a romantic partner. Right?
Okay.
So those are natural but unnecessary desires.
Okay.
And then we have like the third category, which is like the unnatural and empty desires.
Okay.
And those are desires that are largely socially constructed
Oh, interesting.
and like kind of impossible to fully satisfy.
Oh, wow.
So these are things like fame, wealth, power. Those are the things that really get us on that hedonic treadmill that we were talking about earlier, right? Like you achieve a certain level of wealth
Right.
or status, but then your desire just shifts to wanting even more.
Right. So there's no like end point.
Exactly. Yeah. You're never satisfied.
But
You're always wanting more. And so Epicurus's point was basically that focusing on these unnatural and empty desires
Okay.
is like a recipe for unhappiness.
Oh.
It's like you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
Interesting. So are you saying we should just give up on our ambitions?
Well,
Like abandon all hope of achieving anything beyond just like survival? I mean, that seems a little extreme, doesn't it?
it's not about abandoning ambition altogether. It's more about recognizing that certain desires, especially those that are rooted in like external validation
Right.
or like comparison to others, they're just not likely to lead to lasting fulfillment.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So it's not about like what you desire necessarily.
Yeah. It's about where that desire is coming from.
It's about the source.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes sense. If you're always trying to get validation from outside sources.
You're always going to be chasing after the next milestone.
You're never going to feel.
You're never going to be truly content
Yeah.
with what you have. Yeah.
Makes sense.
But if your sense of self-worth
Right.
comes from within, from like living in accordance with your values,
Right.
then external achievements become kind of secondary, right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's not that they're not important.
Right.
It's just that they're not the primary source of your
Yeah.
happiness.
So it's more about like shifting the focus from like external validation to internal fulfillment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I'm still kind of wrestling with this idea of like limiting desires though.
Yeah.
Like doesn't that contradict our natural drive
It seems counterintuitive.
to like achieve
Yes.
and improve and like aren't we like wired
Yeah.
to strive for more? It is a great question. That's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of like what makes Epicureanism so counterintuitive. I think the thing to remember is that it's not about suppressing our desires
Okay.
entirely.
So it's not like
It's not like
become some sort of like monk
no.
and like detached from all
Like,
earthly desire.
It's more about cultivating a discerning awareness of our desires.
Okay.
Right. So it's about Epicurus believed that by understanding the nature of our desires,
Right.
we can learn to distinguish between those that are truly conducive to our well-being
Right.
and those that are likely to lead to pain and frustration.
Okay, so it's about being more intentional about it. Like,
Yeah.
you don't just go after
Exactly.
every desire.
You don't just blindly pursue
Yeah.
every whim that pops into your head. You take a step back, you reflect,
Right. Okay.
and you say, okay, is this desire really serving me?
Yeah.
Or is it just feeding a cycle of dissatisfaction?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And this is where the concept of virtue comes in.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because, you might be surprised to hear that Epicurus, a philosopher who's known for his emphasis on pleasure,
Right.
also placed a high value on virtue.
Wait, virtue in a pleasure-based philosophy.
That's right.
What? Okay. Explain this.
Yeah, so for Epicurus, virtue wasn't about following rigid moral rules. It was about developing qualities of character that helped us live pleasurable and fulfilling lives.
So it was like a more practical,
Yeah.
almost like a strategic
Yeah, strategic.
view of virtue.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, so for example, he believed that prudence, the ability to make wise decisions,
Right.
was essential for choosing pleasures that would lead to lasting happiness rather than fleeting gratification.
Right. Because you can very easily fall into the trap of seeking pleasure
Yeah.
that will ultimately harm you
Right.
in the long run.
Exactly, yeah. And courage, the ability to face our fears, was also really important for overcoming the anxieties and worries that can prevent us from experiencing tranquility.
Right. If you're constantly afraid, you're...
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
never going to be at peace. And then justice, fairness in our dealings with others was seen as essential for creating harmonious relationships, which Epicurus believed were crucial for a good life.
Okay. So virtue, in this sense, is about making choices that are...
Align with our long-term well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if those choices require us to, delay gratification or
Exactly.
face our fears or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's about cultivating a wisdom
Right.
that allows us to navigate the complexities of way in
Yeah.
a way that maximizes our experience of pleasure
Yeah.
and minimizes our experience of pain.
This is making me think about all those times when I've, given in to instant gratification,
Yeah.
knowing full well
We all do it.
it wasn't good for me
It's human nature.
in the long run.
Right.
Okay, so we've established that Epicurus had this very nuanced view of pleasure.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about, go out and party.
Right.
It was about managing your desires,
Exactly.
cultivating virtues that support your well-being.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still struggling with this idea of the absence of pain being the highest form of pleasure.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really enough? Isn't there more to a good life than just not feeling bad? I mean, think about the joy of listening to your favorite music
Right.
or the thrill of achieving a long-held goal.
Right, yeah.
Those experiences seem to
To go beyond
the mere absence of pain.
just the absence of pain.
Right.
Right. What do you think? Can true happiness really be found in this state of just perfect
Neutrality.
neutrality? Yeah. Let us know down in the comments.
What do you guys think?
We'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting, when we're talking about those moments of intense joy,
Right.
excitement, it made me think of some examples.
That Sherman uses in his dissertation where he talks about, the experience of enjoying a delicious cupcake
Okay.
when you're already feeling content.
Right.
Or the intense euphoria
Right.
that someone might feel from taking a certain drug.
Right.
These experiences seem to challenge the idea
Yeah.
that the absence of pain is the ultimate peak of pleasure.
It's a great point. Those are really great examples. And they really get to the heart of a very complex issue,
Yeah.
How do we reconcile those seemingly heightened
Yes.
states of pleasure with Epicurus's emphasis on tranquility
Right.
and the absence of disturbance?
Yeah. So is he saying we should just avoid those moments
Is he saying we should just be
of intense joy
totally bland?
or excitement?
Yeah, just strive for a neutral
Should he just
be
completely neutral all
I
the
don't
time?
think so. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think it's more about understanding the nature of those intense pleasures
Okay.
and recognizing that they're often fleeting.
Right. And can even lead to greater instability in the long run.
Oh, okay.
So, think about the cupcake example.
Yeah.
If you're already feeling content, right?
Right.
The cupcake might provide a momentary burst of pleasure,
Right.
but it's not adding to your overall
Mhm.
level of contentment. In fact, it might even disrupt your sense of balance.
Okay, so it's like if you have like a beautiful painting
Right.
and you add a splash of color,
Yeah.
it might create like a temporary focal point,
Right.
but it doesn't necessarily enhance the overall
Exactly.
beauty.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the drug-induced euphoria example, I
Wow.
think, is even more illustrative, right?
Okay.
Because while the initial high
Right.
might feel incredibly pleasurable, it's often followed by a crash, right?
Right.
A period of withdrawal that can be quite unpleasant.
Oh, so even though it feels amazing in the moment, it actually like
Yeah.
pulls you further away
It takes you further away.
It's from that steady
contentment.
Okay. Yeah. And this is where I think Epicurus' emphasis on prudence
All right.
really comes into play.
Okay.
Because he believed that a wise person would recognize the potential dangers
What?
of chasing those fleeting highs,
Right.
knowing that they could ultimately lead to greater pain
Okay.
and disturbance.
This is making me think about like those times when I've gotten like really caught up in the excitement of a new project
Oh, yeah.
or goal, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like just pouring all my energy into it, neglecting other areas of my life.
Yeah.
And then when that initial enthusiasm kind of wears off,
Right.
I'm left feeling depleted and even a little bit lost.
Yeah. It's a common experience.
Okay.
We often get so focused on achieving a specific outcome
Right?
that we lose sight of the bigger picture of what truly contributes to our overall well-being.
Right.
And I think Epicurus reminds us to cultivate a more balanced approach,
Okay.
to seek pleasures that are sustainable and don't come at the expense of our inner peace.
So what can we do, practically speaking,
Right.
to apply these insights
Good question.
to our own lives?
Yeah. Well, one of the most important things I think we can do
Yeah.
is cultivate contentment
Okay.
with what we already have.
Okay.
And this doesn't mean settling for mediocrity, but
Right.
rather shifting our focus from
Yes.
what we lack
Okay.
to what we already possess.
Okay. So almost like practicing gratitude in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Taking the time to appreciate the good things in our lives, both big and small,
Right.
can have a profound impact on our overall sense of well-being.
Right.
It helps us break free from that constant feeling of wanting more
Right.
and allows us to experience a deeper sense of satisfaction
Yeah.
with our lives as they are.
Yeah. I think the other takeaway that really stands out to me
Yeah.
is this importance of managing desires.
Absolutely.
You know, Epicurus believed that.
Yeah.
By carefully examining our desires, we can learn to distinguish between those that are truly conducive to our happiness
Yeah.
and those that are just going to lead to frustration and disappointment.
Yeah, that's right. It's about being more mindful
Yeah.
of what we're allowing into our mental space.
Yeah. So it's not just about like
Yeah.
what we consume with our bodies,
Yeah.
but like what we consume
With our mind.
with our minds.
Yeah,
Heck.
exactly. Exactly. And it's an ongoing process, right?
Right.
Because our desires are constantly evolving. So
Right.
it's important to regularly check in with ourselves and say, okay, is this desire still serving me
Right.
or is it time to let it go?
It's like decluttering our minds,
Exactly.
clearing out all that like,
Mental and emotional
yeah,
baggage.
baggage that's weighing us down.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This has been an incredibly thought-provoking
Yeah.
deep dive. You know, we've learned that Epicureanism is much more nuanced
It's so much more than
than
just indulge.
than just indulging in every pleasure imaginable.
Mm.
It's a philosophy that encourages us to cultivate wisdom, manage our desires,
Mm.
and find contentment
In the midst of...
in the midst of life's inevitable changes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And while we might not agree with every aspect of Epicureanism,
Of course.
there's no doubt
Of course.
that it offers valuable insights
Yeah.
for navigating
The complexity.
the complexities of modern life.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And we hope this deep dive has sparked some reflection
Yeah.
for you, our listener.
Mm-hmm.
What desires are you holding on to
Right.
that might be causing you unnecessary pain?
Yeah.
What simple
Those
pleasures
small things.
did you cultivate
Yeah.
to bring more joy and contentment into your life?
Yeah. We'd love to hear your thoughts
Share with us.
and insights
Yeah, in the comments below.
down in the comments.
And as always,
As always,
if you enjoyed this deep dive,
don't forget to
don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell
hit that bell.
so you don't miss our next adventure. in knowledge exploration.
That's right.
Until then, keep seeking, keep learning,
keep seeking,
and keep diving deep.
keep diving deep. Yeah, it's not about abandoning ambition altogether. It's more about recognizing that certain desires, especially those that are rooted in like external validation or like comparison to others, they're just not likely to lead to lasting fulfillment.
Okay, I see what you mean. So it's not about like what you desire necessarily.
It's about where that desire is coming from.
It's about the source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense if you're always trying to get validation from outside sources.
You're always going to be chasing after the next milestone.
You're never going to feel.
You're never going to be truly content with what you have.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But if your sense of self-worth
Right.
comes from within, from like living in accordance with your values,
Right.
then external achievements become kind of secondary. Yeah, it's not that they're not important.
Right.
It's just that they're not the primary source of your happiness.
Yeah, so it's more about like shifting the focus from like external validation to internal fulfillment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I'm still kind of wrestling with this idea of like limiting desires though.
Yeah.
I mean, like doesn't that contradict our natural
It
drive
seems counterintuitive.
to like achieve
Yeah.
and improve, and like aren't we like wired
Yeah.
to strive for more?
It is a great question. That's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of like what makes Epicureanism so counterintuitive. I think the thing to remember is that it's not about suppressing our desires
Okay.
entirely.
So it's not like
It's not like,
become some sort of like monk
no.
and like detached from all earthly
Yeah,
desire.
no, it's more about cultivating a discerning awareness of our desires.
Okay.
Right. So it's about Epicurus believed that by understanding the nature of our desires,
Right.
we can learn to distinguish between those that are truly conducive to our well-being. Right.
And those that are likely to lead to pain and frustration.
Okay, so it's about being more intentional about it. Like you don't just go after
Exactly.
every desire.
You don't just blindly pursue
Yeah,
every whim that pops into your head. You take a step back, you reflect,
right, okay.
and you say, okay, is this desire really serving me,
Yeah,
or is it just feeding a cycle of dissatisfaction?
interesting. And this is where the concept of virtue comes in, right?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because, you know, you might be surprised to hear that Epicurus, you know, a philosopher who's known for his emphasis on pleasure,
Right.
also placed a high value on virtue.
Wait, virtue in a pleasure-based philosophy?
That's
What? Okay, explain this.
Yeah, so for Epicurus, virtue wasn't about like following rigid moral rules. It was about developing qualities of character that helped us live pleasurable and fulfilling lives.
So it's like a more practical,
Yeah.
almost like a strategic view of virtue.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So like, for example, he believed that prudence, the ability to make wise decisions,
Okay.
was essential for choosing pleasures that would lead to lasting happiness rather than fleeting gratification.
Right, because you can very easily fall into the trap of like seeking pleasure
Yeah.
that will ultimately harm you
Right.
in the long run.
Exactly. Yeah. Encourage the ability to face our fears.
Yeah.
Was also really important for overcoming the anxieties and worries that can prevent us from experiencing tranquility.
Right. If you're constantly afraid, you're
Exactly. You're never going to be at peace. And then justice, fairness in our dealings with others was seen as essential for creating harmonious relationships, which Epicurus believed were crucial for a good life.
Okay, so virtue in this sense is about making choices that are,
Aligned with our long-term well-being.
yeah,
Yeah.
even if those choices require us to like delay gratification
Exactly.
or face our fears or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's about cultivating a wisdom
Right.
that allows us to navigate the complexities of life
Right.
in a way that maximizes our experience of pleasure
Yeah.
and minimizes our experience of pain.
This is making me think about all those times when I've like given in to instant gratification knowing full well
We all do it.
it wasn't good for me
It's human nature.
in the long run.
Right.
Okay, so we've established that Epicurus had this very nuanced view of pleasure. It wasn't just about like go out and party.
Right.
It was about managing your desires,
Exactly.
cultivating virtues that support your well-being. But I'm still struggling with this idea of the absence of pain being the highest form of pleasure.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really enough? Isn't there more to a good life than just not feeling bad? I mean, think about the joy of listening to your favorite music
Right.
or the thrill of achieving a long-held goal.
Well,
Like those experiences seem to like
they go beyond.
go beyond
The mere absence of pain.
Just the absence of pain.
Right.
Right. What do you think, can true happiness really be found in this state of just perfect
Neutrality.
neutrality?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let us know down in the comments.
What do you guys think?
We'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because when we were talking about those moments of intense joy, excitement, it made me think of some examples Sherman uses in his dissertation where he talks about, like the experience of enjoying a delicious cupcake.
Yeah.
When you're already feeling content.
Okay.
Or like the intense euphoria that someone might feel from taking a certain drug. These experiences seem to challenge the idea that the absence of pain is like the ultimate peak of pleasure.
It's a great point. Those are really great examples, and they really get to the heart of a very complex issue. How do we reconcile those seemingly heightened states of pleasure with Epicurus's emphasis on tranquility
Right.
and the absence of disturbance, right? Remember, Epicurus believed the highest form of pleasure is statics, right? A state of equilibrium where we're free from both pain and intense desire.
So is he saying we should just avoid those moments?
Is he saying we should just be
Of intense joy.
totally or excitement?
Yeah, just strive for a neutral,
Should we just
be completely neutral all the time.
I don't think so. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think it's more about understanding the nature of those intense pleasures
Okay.
and recognizing that they're often fleeting
Right.
and can even lead to greater instability in the long run. So,
Yeah.
think about the cupcake example.
Yeah.
If you're already feeling content, right, the
Yeah.
cupcake might provide a momentary burst of pleasure,
Right.
but it's not adding to your overall
Right.
level of contentment. In fact, it might even disrupt your sense of balance.
Okay, so it's like if you have like a beautiful painting
Right.
and you add a splash of color,
Yeah.
it might create a temporary focal point,
Right.
but it doesn't necessarily enhance the overall.
Exactly.
So-
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the drug-induced euphoria example, I
Right.
think, is even more illustrative, right?
Okay.
Because while the initial high might feel incredibly pleasurable,
Yeah. It's often followed by a crash,
Yeah.
right? A period of withdrawal.
Right.
That can be quite unpleasant.
so even though it feels amazing in the moment, it actually
Yeah.
pulls you further away.
It takes you further away from
A
that
steady state of contentment.
state. Okay.
Yeah, and this is where I think Epicurus's emphasis on prudence
Right.
really comes into play,
Okay.
because he believed that a wise person would recognize the potential dangers
Right.
of chasing those fleeting highs,
Right.
knowing that they could ultimately lead to greater pain
Yeah.
and disturbance.
This is making me think about those times when I've gotten really caught up in the excitement of a new project
Yeah.
or goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just pouring all my energy into it, neglecting other areas of my life.
Right.
And then when that initial enthusiasm kind of wears off,
Right.
I'm left feeling depleted and even a little bit lost.
Yeah, it's a common experience.
Okay.
We often get so focused on achieving a specific outcome that we lose sight of the bigger picture of what truly contributes to our overall well-being.
Right.
And I think Epicurus reminds us to cultivate
Okay.
a more balanced approach,
Okay.
to seek pleasures that are sustainable
Right.
and don't come at the expense of our inner peace.
So what can we do, practically speaking,
Right.
to apply these insights
Well, good question.
to our own lives?
Yeah. Well, one of the most important things I think we can do
Yeah.
is cultivate contentment
Okay.
with what we already have.
Okay.
And this doesn't mean settling for mediocrity,
Right.
but rather shifting our focus from what we lack
All right.
to what we already possess.
Okay, so almost like practicing gratitude in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, taking the time to appreciate the good things in our lives, both big and small,
Right.
can have a profound impact on our overall sense of well-being.
Right.
It helps us break free from that constant feeling of wanting more
Right.
and allows us to experience a deeper sense of satisfaction with our lives as they are.
Yeah. I think the other takeaway that really stands out to me
Yeah.
is this importance of managing desires.
Absolutely.
Epicurus believed that.
Yeah.
By carefully examining our desires,
Right.
we could learn to distinguish between those that are truly conducive to our happiness
Yeah.
and those that are just going to lead to frustration and disappointment.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's about being more mindful
Yeah.
of what we're allowing into our mental space.
Yeah. So it's not just about
Yeah.
what we consume with our bodies, but what we consume
With our minds.
with our minds. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's an ongoing process, right? Because our desires are constantly evolving.
Right.
So it's important to regularly check in with ourselves and say, okay, is this desire still serving me?
Right.
Or is it time to let it go?
It's like decluttering our minds,
Exactly.
clearing out all that, like,
Mental and emotional
baggage that's weighing us down.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Wow. This has been a really fascinating look at Epicureanism and how it can apply to our lives today.
It really is a timeless philosophy.
Yeah. And I love how Sherman in his dissertation really brings it to life.
Yeah.
He doesn't just present it as like this abstract theory.
He makes it really relatable.
He makes it relatable.
Yeah.
He gives us practical examples, shows us how we can actually use these ideas to improve our well-being.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so valuable about this deep dive is that, we're not just talking about ancient history.
Yeah.
We're talking about ideas that can actually make a difference in our lives today.
Absolutely. So whether you're struggling with managing your desires, finding contentment, or just trying to navigate the complexities of modern life, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Definitely.
And as always, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments what resonated with you, what questions you still have, and how you plan to apply these Epicurean insights to your own life.
Yeah, we love hearing your thoughts.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future deep dives.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
See ya. Welcome back to Peak Intrigue, everyone. And if you're liking these deep dives, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
Definitely.
So we're on part 5.
Part 5.
Our 20-part series.
Wow.
And today we are tackling a topic that is both complex and incredibly relevant: Confucian capitalism.
Yeah.
We've got a whole stack of academic papers, articles, research lined up, all exploring how this ancient philosophy is kind of intersecting with modern business practices, especially over in China.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, especially when you consider that Confucianism was actually condemned during the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
And now it's experiencing this resurgence in China's economic landscape.
It really makes you think about the power of cultural values, right?
For sure.
Like, have you ever considered how deeply these values can influence entire economic systems?
Yeah,
Let us know what you think down in the comments.
absolutely.
But first, let's break down what we're dealing with here. What exactly is Confucianism?
That's a great starting point. It's important to remember that Confucianism isn't a religion.
Yeah.
It's more of a social philosophy focused on ethical behavior and harmonious relationships. It's about striving to be a good person and contributing to a stable society.
Okay, so how does that translate into specific principles? Like, what are the core tenets of Confucianism?
Well, one of the most important is the concept of the 5 cardinal relationships.
Okay,
Ruler-subject, father-son, husband-wife, elder brother, younger brother, and friend to friend.
got it.
Each relationship has a defined hierarchy and specific obligations.
So there's a built-in sense of order and duty.
Right.
But it's not just about blindly following rules, right?
Exactly. Confucianism places a huge emphasis on virtues,
Okay.
like benevolence, treating others with kindness and compassion, righteousness, doing what is morally right, propriety, behaving appropriately in different social situations, wisdom, making sound judgments,
Okay.
and trustworthiness, being reliable and honest.
It sounds like a blueprint for ethical leadership, even in a modern business context.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because those values are also reflected in the concept of lie, which is a guiding principle for proper conduct and rituals. It emphasizes things like respect for elders, the importance of education, hard work, thrift, and upholding traditions, all qualities that can translate into a strong work ethic and responsible business practices.
So how do we go from these ancient philosophical ideas to something called Confucian capitalism?
Well, there's actually a fascinating cultural dimension called Confucian dynamism
Okay.
that researchers Hofstede and Bond identified.
Interesting.
They linked Confucian values like persistence, thrift, and a future-oriented mentality to economic growth.
Oh, wow.
And it's been used to explain the rapid economic development of East Asian economies, where these values are deeply rooted.
So like Confucianism provides a cultural foundation that supports economic prosperity.
Yeah, in a way, yes. And it's interesting to contrast Confucian dynamism with Western cultural values.
Yeah.
So, for example, Western societies often score higher on what's called uncertainty avoidance,
Okay.
meaning they prefer to minimize risk and ambiguity.
So would you say that Confucian dynamism, with its focus on long-term goals and perseverance, leads to like a different approach to risk-taking in business?
That's a great question. Imagine a company with a long-term orientation.
Okay.
They might be more willing to invest in projects with a longer time horizon, even if they face short-term uncertainties.
Right, they're playing the long game.
Right.
They're comfortable with a bit of uncertainty along the way.
Exactly.
But how did these ideas actually begin to shape China's economic landscape? After all, entrepreneurship was actively suppressed during the Cultural Revolution.
Right, but that changed drastically with Deng Xiaoping's reforms in the late 1970s.
Okay.
These reforms opened the door for private enterprise to flourish, leading to this rapid economic transformation.
It was like unleashing this wave of entrepreneurial energy.
Yeah, exactly.
And that kind of brings us to this term, Confucian capitalism.
Yeah.
How does that label come about?
So there's actually a few different labels used to describe the Chinese model, like authoritarian capitalism or state capitalism.
Okay.
But Confucian capitalism highlights the role of cultural values in shaping economic behavior and business practices.
So it's not just capitalism happening in China, it's capitalism shaped by a distinctly Confucian worldview.
Exactly.
We see this in the prevalence of family businesses, the emphasis on social harmony in business dealings, and the crucial role of guanxi.
Yes.
Guanxi, now there's a term we hear a lot when talking about doing business in China. What exactly does it mean?
Yeah. Guanxi is often translated as connections or relationships, but it's much more than just networking.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a web of personal relationships based on trust, reciprocity, and obligation.
So it's like building strong, long-term relationships where people feel obligated to help each other out.
You could say that. It's about building mutual trust and understanding that benefits both parties in the long run. In a way, Guanxi acts as a social lubricant, facilitating business transactions and helping people navigate China's complex bureaucracy.
It sounds like it can be incredibly beneficial for businesses operating in China.
Right.
But are there any downsides to guanxi?
Well, while Guanxi can foster trust and loyalty, some argue that it can also lead to issues like favoritism and corruption.
So it's a complex system with both positive and negative aspects. I'd love to hear from our listeners on this one.
For sure.
What are your thoughts on guanxi?
Yeah.
Do you think it's a necessary part of doing business in China?
Right.
Or does it create an uneven playing field? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Definitely. Yeah, and what's interesting about Guanxi is how it contrasts with Western business practices that often prioritize individual achievement and meritocracy. Guanxi emphasizes the collective good and the importance of maintaining social harmony, even in like a competitive business environment.
That's a really important point. Like it challenges some of our fundamental assumptions about how business should be conducted. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the broader debates surrounding the relevance of Confucianism in modern China. Not everyone agrees on its role in the country's economic success, do they?
You're right, there are definitely differing viewpoints on this. Some critics argue that certain Confucian values might actually hinder entrepreneurship and innovation.
Really? How so? I thought we were talking about how Confucianism promotes hard work and a future-oriented mindset.
Those are definitely positive aspects, but critics point to other Confucian principles like the emphasis on tradition and respect for hierarchy as potential roadblocks. They argue that a culture that values conformity and deference to authority might struggle to cultivate the kind of disruptive thinking that drives innovation.
I see what you mean. Like if you're always focused on maintaining harmony and following established norms, it might be harder to challenge the status quo or propose radical new ideas. Is that what they're getting at?
Exactly. Some argue that Confucian societies might inadvertently create a climate where it's safer to follow the well-trodden path rather than venture into uncharted territory. And they suggest that this could explain why, despite China's economic advancements, it still lags behind some Western nations in certain areas of technological innovation.
That's a fascinating perspective. But haven't we also seen how Confucian values can actually facilitate economic growth? How do they reconcile those two seemingly contradictory arguments?
Yeah, that's where the debate becomes really nuanced. Proponents of Confucian capitalism emphasize the strong work ethic, the emphasis on education, and the long-term vision fostered by Confucianism as significant advantages in the modern global economy. They believe these values are actually assets, not liabilities.
It's almost like a built-in cultural predisposition towards diligence, perseverance, and planning for the future.
Precisely. These qualities align perfectly with the demands of a competitive marketplace. Remember Confucian dynamism. The long-term orientation encouraged by Confucian values could make businesses more resilient in the face of economic fluctuations. They're less likely to panic and make rash decisions when things get tough.
Okay, I'm starting to see how both sides of the argument have valid points. It's not as simple as saying Confucianism is either good or bad for business. It's more complicated than that.
Absolutely. And we can't ignore the impact of external forces like globalization and the influx of Western ideas. These factors are also shaping the evolution of Confucian capitalism.
So how do these competing forces play out in practice? What happens when traditional Confucian values encounter Western concepts like individualism and free market competition? Are they compatible, or are we witnessing a clash of civilizations in the economic sphere?
That's the million-dollar question. Some see the integration of Western ideas as a natural progression, like a way for Confucianism to adapt to the realities of a globalized world. Others worry that the rise of individualism might erode traditional values like collectivism and social harmony, leading to a decline in social cohesion.
It sounds like China is walking a tightrope, trying to balance its cultural heritage with the demands of a globalized economy.
Exactly. And the outcome of this balancing act will have profound implications not just for China, but for the global economic order.
This is a conversation that could go on for hours, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Do you believe that Confucian capitalism is a sustainable model for the future? Could it even offer valuable lessons for Western economies? Or are these systems ultimately incompatible? Share your insights in the comments below.
Yeah, it really is. It's like, how do you reconcile those deeply rooted cultural values with the forces of globalization?
Right.
It's like trying to merge two different operating systems.
And it's playing out on a massive scale over in China.
Exactly.
We've been discussing the theory of Confucian capitalism,
Right.
but I'm kind of curious to see how it actually manifests in the real world. Are there like examples of business leaders who embody these Confucian values in their leadership style?
Absolutely. In fact, many point to like successful Chinese entrepreneurs
Oh.
as evidence that Confucian principles can be effectively applied to modern business practices.
So there's a distinctly Confucian way of leading.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Think back to those core Confucian virtues that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trustworthiness. These qualities are often seen as essential traits for leaders in a Confucian context.
Okay, but how do those virtues translate into concrete leadership practices?
Sure.
Can you give me like a specific example?
Let's take the concept of benevolence.
Okay.
A benevolent leader in a Confucian framework
Mm-hmm.
isn't just focused on maximizing profits.
Right.
They genuinely care about the well-being of their employees and strive to create a harmonious and ethical work environment.
So it's like leading with compassion and empathy, not just authority and commands.
Exactly. A Confucian leader is expected to be a role model, someone who inspires their team through their own integrity and commitment to ethical conduct.
It's not just about what they say, but how they act. They set the tone for the entire organization.
Precisely. And this often translates into a strong emphasis on loyalty, respect for seniority, and a shared sense of purpose within the company.
That sounds pretty different from the more individualistic, results-oriented style we often see in like Western business leadership.
Yeah, there are definitely contrasts. But it's important to note that Confucian leadership isn't static.
Yeah.
Many modern Chinese business leaders are finding creative ways to adapt these principles to the realities of a globalized world.
So it's not about clinging rigidly to tradition, but finding ways to make those values relevant in a modern context.
Exactly. The most successful Confucian leaders are those who can strike a balance between honoring their cultural heritage and embracing innovation. They understand the importance of building trust and strong relationships while also being adaptable and open to new ideas.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act, almost
Well,
like walking a tightrope.
You could say that. And perhaps that's the key takeaway from our deep dive into Confucian capitalism. It's a system built on navigating tensions. It's about balancing individual ambition with collective good, honoring tradition while embracing innovation, and finding a middle ground between Eastern and Western values.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From ancient philosophy to modern business practices. From core Confucian values to the complexities of Guangxi. It's clear that Confucian capitalism is a topic that deserves further exploration, and it'll be fascinating to see how it continues to evolve in the years to come.
For sure. And the impact of this evolution will be felt far beyond China's borders.
Absolutely. So we'll leave you with this final thought. Can Confucian capitalism offer a viable alternative to Western-style capitalism in the 21st century?
Right.
Or are these two systems ultimately on a collision course? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your insights down in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those perspectives open. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Peak Intrigue. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future deep dives.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you all here.
This is part 6 of our 20-part series on Taoism.
We're diving deep into the concept of Wu Wei today. It might just change how you see the world.
Wu Wei. Sounds kind of mysterious, right?
It is fascinating. Wu Wei is often translated as effortless action or non-doing.
But it doesn't actually mean being totally passive.
Right. It's not about being passive at all. It's more like aligning yourself with the universe, going with the flow.
Okay, I think I get it. Like those times when you're so absorbed in something, you lose track of everything else.
Exactly. Maybe you're playing music or coding or just having a really great conversation.
And everything just clicks. You're in the zone.
That's the feeling Wu Wei aims for. It's about recognizing that there's this underlying order to everything, and instead of fighting against it, we can learn to move with it.
Cool. So for those who are new to Taoism, can you give us a quick rundown? What's the deal with this Tao everyone's talking about?
Well, the Tao is like the natural order of the universe. It's not a god or a set of rules. Think of it more like a force that connects everything.
The force.
Yeah, a force that flows through everything. And living in harmony with the Tao is all about understanding and aligning yourself with it.
Gotcha. So how do those classic Taoist texts like the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi fit into all of this? Do they lay out the rules for how to live in harmony with the Tao?
Not exactly rules. They offer insights and stories, poems, and observations, helping us understand what the Tao is all about.
Like a guidebook.
In a way, yes. They encourage us to look at nature and feel how everything is connected. Ultimately, it's about learning to go with the flow of the Tao.
So it's less about strict doctrines and more about a way of seeing and being in the world then.
Exactly. That's where Wu Wei comes in. It's not about forcing things to happen or trying to control every little thing. It's about knowing when to act and when to, step back.
This idea of non-doing sounds a little counterintuitive, to be honest.
I know.
Especially in today's world, we're always told to hustle and strive for more.
I know, right? It's a great question, though. How do we reconcile Wu Wei with achieving goals?
So how does that work?
It's important to remember that Wu Wei isn't about being lazy or passive. It's about intelligent action. It's about finding that balance between striving and surrendering so your actions are aligned with the flow.
Okay, so it's not about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about knowing when to act and when to let things happen naturally.
Precisely. And when you find that balance, you can tap into this thing called a flow state. It's that feeling of being completely present. Action feels effortless, almost instinctual.
It's like those athletes who describe being in the zone.
Yeah, like Bill Russell, the basketball player.
He talked about how he would feel like he was playing in slow motion. Like he could see how the game would play out before it happened.
Exactly. That's the flow state in action. Your actions are totally in sync with the situation. Another great example is from the Zhuangzi, the story of Cooking.
The butcher who cuts oxen with incredible skill.
You know it. He makes it look so effortless, almost like a dance.
I remember reading that.
And what's amazing is how Cooking describes it. He doesn't even see the whole ox anymore. He moves with its natural structure, letting his spirit guide his hand.
Wow. So he's not overthinking each cut, just going with the flow of the animal.
That's Wu Wei. He's moving in harmony with the ox.
Powerful image. He's totally surrendered to the process. But how can we see like that in everyday life? It's hard to find that effortless action with deadlines and to-do lists and everything.
Well, that's where the wisdom of yin and yang comes into play.
Ah, yin and yang. That classic symbol. Black and white swirling around.
Yeah, it's a powerful image, but do you really understand the deeper meaning behind it?
Honestly, not really. I know it's about balance, but I'm not sure I get the whole picture.
Well, it represents the interplay of opposites, like light and dark, action and stillness, giving and receiving, all those dualities, and they're all connected and constantly changing.
So it's about finding the right balance between them.
Yeah, but what people often miss is the power of yin, the receptive, passive force. Yeah. We always overvalue yang, the go-getter, assertive energy.
Sure.
But we forget that stillness and allowing are just as important.
So both forces are essential.
Think about it. Even yang things need yin to exist. Like a mug, it's only useful because it's empty, right?
Yeah, true. Never thought about it like that.
Or think about a room. It's functional because of the empty space within it.
I get it.
Even strength training. Muscles grow during the rest periods. not the intense workout.
Wow. So embracing yin is actually about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just let things be.
Exactly. Create space for things to happen.
Makes sense. But it's hard to shift our mindset, especially with everything going on in life.
I know, right? It's all about productivity, achievement, constantly moving. We forget about stillness.
So how can we actually use this understanding of yin and yang to bring more of this wu-wei into our lives? How do we find the sweet spot between action and non-action,
Yeah,
effort and ease?
great question. That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. So how do we find that balance between action and non-action, effort and ease? Bringing more wu-wei into our lives, it all starts with awareness
Awareness of what?
of where you're resisting the natural flow in your life. Think about it. Those areas where you constantly feel like you're swimming upstream.
I see what you mean.
Maybe it's a work project that's a constant uphill battle, or a relationship that's just like full of tension and arguments.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Or even just something like, micromanaging your schedule, trying to plan out every single minute of your day.
Oh my gosh, that's totally me. I'm such a planner. I always think if I have the right planner, I can control time itself.
But that's the thing. The more we try to control things, the more frustrated we get when things inevitably go off track. Life. Yeah.
Life always throws those curveballs. You can't plan for everything.
Exactly. So maybe it's a good idea to build in a little more wu-wei, more flexibility, acceptance.
Yeah, that makes sense. Instead of just powering through our to-do list, we can learn to move with the rhythm of the day a little more.
I love that. Moving with the rhythm of the day. And of course, that rhythm changes from day to day, right?
Sure.
Some days are more yang energy, action, and some days are more yin, rest, reflection. It's about recognizing that.
It's like we all have our own little yin and yang cycles going on inside. And when we honor those cycles, we can tap into this more natural flow of energy.
Yes, exactly. And this brings us back to yin, the power of yin, right?
Right.
Wu-wei isn't just about taking action when it's appropriate. It's also about knowing when to step back, to rest, to simply be.
To just allow things to be. I think that's where a lot of us struggle. We're so used to always doing, achieving, moving forward.
I know, but often it's in those moments of stillness, of non-doing, that new insights come up. Creative solutions just appear out of nowhere.
Like when you've been stuck on a problem forever and then you step away, take a walk, take a shower, and bam, the answer hits you.
Exactly. Those moments of receptivity are so powerful, we have to create space for them.
This makes a lot of sense. So to recap, wu-wei is about finding that right balance between action and non-action, effort and ease.
Exactly.
And yin and yang can help us find that balance.
It's all connected.
We also talked about letting go of control, embracing the present moment, accepting whatever happens.
All essential parts of wu-wei.
And these principles can be applied to so many parts of life, right? Work, relationships, personal growth, creativity.
Absolutely.
It's like a whole different way of approaching life. Instead of striving, we're flowing. Instead of controlling, we're allowing. But, it's a journey, not a destination.
So true.
We're cultivating a way of being, not trying to reach some perfect state of wu-wei.
Couldn't have said it better myself. There is no finish line with this. It's a practice.
Right.
We just keep learning and refining, applying these ideas to all the changes in our lives.
Which brings us to the Stoic idea of amor fati, right? Embracing what happens, accepting the good and the bad.
Oh, yes. Great connection. When we're in that flow state, practicing wu-wei, we let go of attachment to outcomes. We're not so focused on how things should be. We're just present with how they are.
Just being in the moment.
Yes. And that's where true freedom is. Letting go of that need to control, trusting the flow, embracing the present moment, no matter what it brings.
It's a paradox, for sure. Letting go to find freedom. But it feels like that's at the core of Taoism.
Absolutely. And it's so liberating once we start to understand it.
So for those of us who want to start bringing more wu-wei into our lives, where do we even begin?
I think the most important thing is just to start paying attention, becoming aware of where you're resisting the natural flow.
Can you give us some examples of what that might look like?
Sure. Think about it. Do you constantly check your phone? Even when you're trying to relax?
Uh-oh. Guilty.
Do you get frustrated when things don't go according to plan?
Yep.
Do you try to control everything in your life, even the things you can actually control?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Those are signs you might be resisting the flow.
Okay, so step one is to notice those patterns. Then what?
Once you see where you're holding on too tightly, you can try different things, like taking more breaks during the day,
Yeah, you do that.
or delegating tasks that drain you, or even just practicing the art of letting go of expectations, outcomes, the need to be perfect.
So giving ourselves permission to relax a little, trust the process, find that sweet spot between effort and ease.
You got it. And remember, Wu Wei is a practice, not a destination. Be patient with yourself.
Embrace the journey.
Yes.
I'd love to hear about your personal experiences with Wu Wei. Have you had those aha moments where you really felt the power of this concept?
Oh, absolutely. One that comes to mind is when I was writing my dissertation. Oh, yeah, my dissertation. Well, it's just this massive project and felt so overwhelming. I was putting so much pressure on myself to make it perfect.
Oh, I feel that.
I was stressed all the time. Honestly, I was just miserable, pushing myself way too hard, trying to force myself to write.
Sounds rough.
It was like swimming against the current.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that feeling.
Yeah.
Dissertation writing is no joke.
It really isn't. And then I remembered Wu Wei, all the stuff we've been talking about. And I thought, maybe I should try something different. So I started paying attention to my natural rhythms, working when I had energy and resting when I was drained.
So you were actually applying the principles of Wu Wei to your dissertation.
Exactly. And you know what? The writing actually became more enjoyable. I was making more progress because when I let myself rest, my mind could actually breathe, process information, make connections, come up with new ideas.
So you were tapping into that creative power of non-doing, letting go and allowing insights to come to you.
Exactly. I learned that Wu Wei is not about giving up or being lazy. It's about working smarter, not harder. It's about aligning with the natural flow of your energy and letting things unfold in their own time.
It's like that story of Cookting and the oxen. It wasn't about brute force. It was about moving in harmony with the animal, trusting his intuition and skill.
Yes. He said he no longer saw the whole ox, but followed its natural makeup, letting his spirit guide his hand. I think that's what Wu Wei is all about. Letting go of the need to overthink and control, trusting our intuition, and moving in sync with the natural order of things.
It's a beautiful concept. I think we've all had glimpses of that effortless flow in our lives. But how do we find it more often, especially with all the chaos of modern life?
Well, like we talked about, it starts with awareness. Noticing where we're resisting the flow. Are we clinging to expectations, outcomes that need to control everything? Once we see those patterns, we can start experimenting.
Give us some examples. What can our listeners actually do?
Okay, how about this? Try taking more pauses throughout the day. Instead of constantly rushing, take a few minutes to just breathe. Be present. Reconnect with yourself.
Okay, I like that. What else?
Try delegating tasks that are draining your energy. Give yourself permission to ask for help, or even something as simple as spending time in nature. Just observe how everything flows so effortlessly. The seasons, the cycles of growth and decay.
So it's about creating space for stillness, for those moments of non-doing. That's how we connect with our inner wisdom and align with the natural flow.
Exactly. It's a journey of learning to trust, learning to let go, allowing life to unfold in its own way. And maybe along the way, we'll discover a whole new level of flow, creativity, and joy.
I love that. That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights on Wu Wei.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Taoism and the power of Wu Wei. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. And be sure to share your thoughts and experiences with Wu Wei in the comments below. We always love hearing from you.
Until next time, may you find harmony and flow in all that you do.
Welcome back to Peak Intrigue. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. This is part 7 of our 20-part deep dive into Buddhism. We've got a bunch of YouTube videos and even a text document, and we're going to try to figure out what this ancient tradition is all about.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex tradition, lots to cover.
So let's start with something simple, like what exactly is Buddhism? We've all heard of Buddha, but is it like a philosophy or a religion? What are we talking about here?
Well, most people consider it one of the major world religions, but it's also a philosophy and a way of life, all wrapped up into one. And you're right, Buddha is actually not a name. It's more like a title. It means awakened one.
Okay, so is there like a most famous Buddha, like the OG Buddha?
Yeah, the most well-known Buddha was Siddhartha Gautama. And get this, he was born a prince.
A prince. That's not the typical story you hear about religious founders.
That's what makes his story so interesting. He had it all: luxury, comfort, no suffering whatsoever. But then he saw the realities of life. Old age, sickness, death, the heavy stuff. It really threw him into an existential crisis.
Yeah, I can imagine. Going from a life of privilege to suddenly facing the harsh realities of existence.
Yeah.
It's been quite a shock.
Yeah. It was a big turning point for him. He decided to give up his princely life and went on this spiritual quest to figure out how to escape suffering.
Sounds like a pretty intense journey. What did that look like?
He tried a lot of different things, even like extreme fasting and stuff. But eventually he realized that the path to enlightenment was this thing called the middle way. Basically, it's all about balance. Not too much indulgence, not too much deprivation, finding that sweet spot.
The middle way. That sounds like a pretty central theme in Buddhism, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you could say that. It pops up everywhere.
So how did he finally achieve this enlightenment? Give us the SparkNotes version.
So he sits under this tree. They call it the Bodhi tree now. It's like a pilgrimage site. And he vows to meditate until he finds the answer to suffering. No sleep, no food, just straight meditation.
Talk about dedication.
Yeah, and after days of intense meditation, it finally hit him. The root cause of all suffering is attachment. Clinging to things that are temporary possessions, relationships, even ideas.
Sounds familiar.
It's a universal experience. And that realization right there under the Bodhi tree, that was his awakening. That's the foundation of Buddhism.
So Buddhism is basically a roadmap to overcome suffering. But how do you actually, do that?
Well, it starts with understanding what's called the Four Noble Truths. Think of these as Buddhism's, diagnosis of the human condition.
Okay, I'm listening. Lay it on me.
The first truth is dukkha. It's often translated as suffering, but it's more than just, physical pain or sadness. It's this deep sense of dissatisfaction that kind of permeates everything, that feeling that something's just not quite right, even when things seem okay on the surface. Ever felt that?
Yeah, for sure. It's even when things are going well, there's still this nagging feeling that something's missing, a kind of emptiness.
Exactly. And the second truth tells us what causes that dukkha, desire, or craving. It's this clinging to things, material possessions, relationships, ideas, you name it. We attach to them, but they're always changing, they're impermanent. And that clinging is what keeps us stuck in this cycle of dissatisfaction.
Makes sense. So it's not the things themselves that cause suffering, but our attachment to them.
You got it. It's like one source even compares it to those bottomless breadstick baskets they have at some restaurants. Seems endless, right?
Until you hit the bottom,
Right.
Which, let's be honest, is never satisfying.
Exactly. You're left wanting more. And that's the trap of desire. The more you feed it, the hungrier it gets.
So the first two truths are all about identifying the problem and its root cause. What about the third truth? Is there any hope?
Absolutely. The third truth is that suffering can end. Since desire is the root cause, if you can extinguish that desire, you can end the suffering. It's like putting out the fire.
So simple, yet so hard. How do we actually extinguish that desire?
Well, that's where the fourth noble truth comes in. It points to the eightfold path as the way to overcome dukkha. It's like a map, guiding you towards mental and ethical well-being.
So it's not about reaching some kind of paradise after you die, but about transforming yourself here and now.
Exactly. It's about cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline to purify your mind and break free from suffering.
So what's on this eightfold path? Can we, get a sneak peek at the map?
Sure, it includes things like right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. If you had to pick one that's, super important, which would it be?
They're all connected, but right speech is super relevant these days. It's about speaking truthfully, kindly, and being mindful of how your words affect others. What do you think? Which one stands out to you? Let us know in the comments.
I've always been intrigued by right mindfulness, being present in the moment, really savoring a meal or a conversation, not letting your mind wander off to worries or regrets.
Yeah, mindfulness is huge. It's about cultivating this deep awareness of your thoughts, feelings, and sensations without getting swept away by them. One source put it this way: don't let that memory of that one time you peed your pants at school distract you from your ice cream moment.
That's hilarious. And so true. We miss out on so much when we're stuck in our heads.
Totally. And that's where right concentration comes in. It's about developing that laser focus, honing your mind to gain deeper insights into reality.
So it's right mindfulness is expanding your awareness, and right concentration is about focusing that awareness.
You got it. It's like using a magnifying glass to zoom in on the inner workings of your mind.
This is fascinating stuff, but I'm still a little hazy on some of the other Buddhist beliefs. What about karma? Isn't that cosmic reward and punishment?
That's a common misunderstanding. In Buddhism, karma isn't about some divine being judging your every move. It's more like a natural law of cause and effect. Every action, thought, even word creates a ripple, shaping your future experiences.
So it's not about some external judge-keeping score, but about the natural consequences of our actions.
Exactly. Think of it like planting seeds. If you plant an apple seed, guess what? You get an apple tree. Same idea with your actions. Actions rooted in kindness, generosity, compassion, those will bear positive fruits. And actions rooted in greed, hatred, delusion, well, those lead to suffering.
Okay, so it's like we're planting seeds with every choice we make, and those seeds shape our future experiences. But what about this whole rebirth thing? Like, do we just keep coming back over and over again? Is it like Groundhog Day, but for, like, eternity?
That's where the concept of samsara comes in. It's the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Buddhism teaches that we've been reborn countless times, and each lifetime is influenced by the karma we've accumulated. You know, those seeds we were talking about.
So, like, if you mess up in this life, you get a do-over in the next one, hopefully with better starting stats.
Kind of. But it's not just about racking up points or avoiding bad stuff. It's about purifying your mind, cultivating positive qualities. The ultimate goal is to break free from the cycle of suffering and achieve liberation.
And that's where nirvana comes in, right? I always pictured it as this, like, heavenly realm where you chill out on clouds and play harps. Am I close?
Nirvana is often misunderstood. It's not so much a place you go to, but more like a state of being, a state of freedom from suffering. You achieve it when you extinguish the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. You know, all the stuff that keeps us trapped in samsara.
So it's not about escaping to somewhere else, but about transforming your inner experience.
Exactly. It's about transcending the limitations of your ego and realizing your true nature. The tricky thing is, those who have achieved nirvana can't really describe it. It's beyond our ordinary understanding. Like, imagine trying to explain the taste of chocolate to someone who's never tasted it. You can use all the words you want, but they won't truly get it until they experience it for themselves.
That's a pretty awesome analogy. But how do you actually get to nirvana? Is it like a one-lifetime kind of deal?
It's a gradual process, and it can take many lifetimes to fully realize it. Buddhism recognizes that everyone is at a different stage in their understanding and their level of commitment, so there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
So there are different paths within Buddhism. I've heard of things like Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. What's the difference?
Yeah, Buddhism has evolved into different branches over time, each one with its own unique emphasis and practices. Theravada, which means School of the Elders, is thought to be the oldest surviving school. They're really focused on the Pali Canon, which is a collection of ancient scriptures. They believe it holds the Buddha's original teachings.
So they're all about sticking to the original texts and keeping the tradition pure.
Exactly. They believe in individual enlightenment through rigorous study, meditation, and monastic discipline. They view the Buddha as a supreme teacher, but they believe it's up to each individual to walk the path and achieve liberation on their own.
Sounds like a very DIY approach to enlightenment.
You could say that. But then you have Mahayana Buddhism, which means great vehicle. This branch came a little later, and it kind of expanded on the original teachings. They added new texts and concepts. And one of the key differences is the emphasis on bodhisattvas.
Oh yeah, bodhisattvas. Those are like the super compassionate beings who delay their own enlightenment to help others, right?
Exactly. Mahayana Buddhism sees enlightenment as more of a group project. It's not just about liberating yourself, but about helping all beings achieve awakening.
That's a pretty amazing concept. So while Theravada is like a solo journey, Mahayana is more like a group adventure.
I like that analogy. And this difference in focus is reflected in their practices. Mahayana Buddhism includes a wider range of approaches, things like chanting mantras and visualization practices.
So it's like Theravada is more about hitting the books and meditating solo, while Mahayana adds in some chanting and group activities.
Yeah, you could say that. And within Mahayana, there are even more sub-schools, each with its own unique flavor and practices.
Buddhism is definitely more diverse than I realized.
It is. It's really amazing how such a profound philosophy has been able to evolve and branch out over centuries while still staying true to its core message. It speaks to its adaptability and its enduring relevance. We were talking about Tibetan Buddhism earlier, remember?
Yeah, you mentioned it was a distinct form of Mahayana that developed in Tibet. Do they have like any unique practices?
Oh, yeah. Tibetan Buddhism is known for its super rich rituals. intricate mandalas, the use of mantras, and a cool lineage system with these revered teachers called lamas. Have you ever seen a mandala?
I have.
Yeah.
They're those super detailed circular designs, right? The ones that are used for meditation. They're stunning.
Exactly. They represent the universe and the path to enlightenment. Tibetan Buddhism also places a big emphasis on the role of the guru or lama. They act as guides for students on their spiritual journey.
And speaking of lamas, the Dalai Lama is probably the most famous one, right? The spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism.
You got it. The current Dalai Lama is considered the 14th reincarnation of a bodhisattva of compassion. He's a huge advocate for peace, nonviolence, and interfaith dialogue. He's also been a vocal advocate for Tibetan autonomy since the Chinese takeover of Tibet back in 1959.
His commitment to compassion in the face of all that is truly remarkable.
It really shows you the transformative power of Buddhist practice. Even in the face of immense political pressure and personal hardship, he still embodies the principles of loving kindness and forgiveness.
It's incredible how Buddhism has spread so far and wide, crossing cultural and geographical boundaries.
It's a testament to the universality of its message, the idea that suffering is a part of life, but there's a way to overcome it through wisdom, compassion, and mindful living. What's been the most impactful takeaway for you so far? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
It's amazing how many different facets there are to Buddhism. From the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to Nirvana and Samsara, it's a lot to wrap your head around. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love to talk about some of the people who've really shaped this tradition, those figures who have left their mark on the world through their practice and teachings.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to see how these individuals have embodied the teachings and passed them on. They all offer such unique perspectives and approaches to the path.
Definitely. And speaking of unique perspectives, we've mentioned the Dalai Lama a few times. He's a pretty inspiring guy. Can you tell us a bit more about his life and legacy?
Sure. So the Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. He is considered to be the 14th reincarnation of a bodhisattva of compassion, which is, pretty remarkable in itself.
It's wild. 14 lifetimes dedicated to compassion. That's serious dedication.
It is. And in this lifetime, he's dedicated to promoting peace, nonviolence, and interfaith dialogue. He's been a huge advocate for Tibetan autonomy, especially since he's been living in exile since the Chinese takeover of Tibet in 1959.
It's incredible how he's remained so committed to compassion, even in the face of such adversity.
It's a true testament to the power of Buddhist practice, wouldn't you say? Even with all the political pressure and personal hardship, he still embodies those principles of loving kindness and forgiveness. It's pretty inspiring.
It really is. It makes you wonder, are there any other figures who embody that same level of commitment to helping others, even outside of Tibetan Buddhism?
Absolutely. There are so many inspiring figures throughout Buddhist history. One that comes to mind is Shinran. He was a Japanese monk who lived in the 12th century, and he founded the true Pure Land school of Buddhism. It's a school that really emphasizes faith in Amitabha Buddha.
Amitabha Buddha. Who's that?
Amitabha is a celestial Buddha, kind of like a Buddha of infinite light and life. He represents compassion and wisdom, and Shinran believed that simply reciting his name with sincere devotion could lead to rebirth in the Pure Land.
What's the Pure Land?
It's basically a realm of bliss and enlightenment. It's a place where you can focus on your spiritual development without all the distractions and suffering of our earthly existence.
Sounds pretty nice.
Yeah.
So is this Pure Land school more about faith and devotion as opposed to striving for enlightenment on your own?
Yeah, exactly. Shinran believed that in this day and age, with all the distractions and challenges we face, it's really difficult to achieve enlightenment through our own efforts alone. He taught that it's important to rely on the compassion of Amitabha Buddha, to kind of surrender to that greater power and let it guide you.
It's fascinating how many different paths there are within Buddhism, each one tailored to different personalities and needs.
That's one of the beautiful things about it. Buddhism is all about inclusivity and recognizing that there's no one right way to achieve enlightenment, just like there's no one right way to live a good life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Buddhism, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? How can we take these ancient teachings and apply them to our modern lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern living. Well, one thing that stands out to me is the importance of mindfulness, especially in our world today with everything moving so fast and all the constant distractions.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the chaos and lose sight of the present moment. We're always thinking about the future or dwelling on the past.
Mindfulness is a way to step out of that mental whirlwind. to reconnect with the here and now. It's about cultivating that non-judgmental awareness of your thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And it allows you to experience life with more clarity and peace.
And the cool thing is, anyone can practice mindfulness. It's like a skill you can develop through things like meditation.
Exactly. It's like a mental muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Even just a few minutes a day can make a huge difference.
Mindfulness is definitely key, but it's not the only thing, right? What about compassion? How do we cultivate more of that in a world that often feels so divided and disconnected?
That's such an important question. And Buddhism has a lot to say about compassion. It starts with recognizing that we're all interconnected, that we all share this human experience, and we all want to be happy and free from suffering.
It's about seeing past the superficial differences that divide us and connecting on that deeper level of shared humanity.
Yes. It's about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with them, and offering kindness and understanding, even when it's hard. Even small acts of kindness can make a big difference. They can create a ripple effect that spreads outward.
It's a beautiful vision, and one that we desperately need in the world today. It's been an incredible journey exploring the world of Buddhism with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise.
The pleasure was all mine. It's always a joy to dive into these profound teachings.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to learn more about Buddhism. We encourage you to keep exploring and to find ways to apply these teachings to your own life.
Remember, Buddhism is not about dogma or blind faith. It's about personal experience and transformation.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought. If you could embody one Buddhist principle in your life more fully, which one would it be and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of fascinating topics. Until next time.
Welcome back to Peak Intrigue. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy our deep dives. We're on part 8 of our 20-part series exploring medieval thought. And today we're taking a closer look at scholastic philosophy. So get ready. Things are about to get insightful.
I'm excited to dive in.
Now, you might hear scholasticism and think Latin, monks, dusty old libraries, but it's much more than that.
Yeah, scholasticism often gets bogged down in these superficial associations. Instead of focusing on the when and the where, we need to understand the core philosophical ideas that make this system so fascinating.
So it's all about the what and the why. What were these thinkers grappling with, and how did they approach big questions about reality, knowledge, and human existence?
Exactly. Let's start by dispelling a common myth. Many assume that scholasticism was simply about blindly following ancient authorities, particularly Aristotle.
Right, like they were just parroting what came before them.
Well, not quite. While scholastics drew inspiration from Aristotle, they weren't afraid to engage in rigorous debate, challenge his ideas, and develop their own unique philosophical systems.
So more like a dynamic conversation with the past, building upon and sometimes even disagreeing with those who came before them.
Precisely. Take the arrival of St. Thomas Aquinas in Paris, for example. He didn't just toe the line. He sparked intense debates that shook the intellectual foundations of the time.
I'm all ears. What kind of intense debates are we talking about here?
Think fundamental questions about the nature of the soul, the relationship between matter and form, even how change is possible in the universe. These weren't just academic squabbles, they were grappling with the building blocks of reality itself.
Wow, that's pretty heavy stuff. It really puts those dusty old libraries in a new light.
It does, doesn't it? This commitment to reasoned argumentation and the pursuit of truth is what really defines scholasticism, and it's a tradition that continues to resonate today.
So let's dive into some of these core ideas. One that I've come across is metaphysics. What exactly does that entail?
Think of metaphysics as the study of being what exists, why it exists, and what its fundamental nature is. It's about seeking those ultimate principles that govern reality.
Okay, so not just what is, but why it is and what it all means. Pretty deep, right?
It is, and one of the key concepts within scholastic metaphysics is the idea of act and potency. Imagine an acorn, for instance. It has the potential, the potency, to become a mighty oak tree. But that potential is only realized when it actually grows and develops, achieving its full act.
So potency is like the blueprint and act is the finished product.
That's a great way to put it. This concept helps scholastics understand how change and development were possible, not just in the natural world, but also in more abstract realms. They even applied it to the concept of God, who is pure act with no unrealized potential.
That makes sense. Now, how about matter and form? I've heard that term thrown around in relation to scholasticism.
It's another crucial concept. Scholastics believe that everything that exists is composed of both matter, the basic stuff of existence, and form, which gives that matter its specific shape, qualities, and purpose.
So matter is like the clay and form is the sculptor who shapes it.
Exactly. And this composition of matter and form explain how things could change and transform. The matter remains the same, but the form changes, leading to a new substance. Take, for example, water turning into ice. The matter is still there, but the form has shifted, giving it new properties.
That's a really helpful analogy. So if everything is composed of matter and form, what makes each individual unique? Like what makes this oak tree different from that oak tree, even though they share the same oakness?
That's the problem of individuation, and it was a topic of much debate among scholastic thinkers. Some argued it was the specific matter that made each thing unique, while others pointed to subtle variations in form or a combination of both. It was a question that challenged them to delve deeper into the nature of being itself.
Wow, so even something as seemingly simple as what makes an individual unique can lead to a deep philosophical rabbit hole.
Absolutely, and that's what makes scholasticism so fascinating. It takes these everyday observations and pushes them to their philosophical limits, forcing us to rethink our assumptions about the world around us. What are your initial thoughts on this concept of individuation, and how would you answer that question of uniqueness? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. Now, let's move beyond the realm of metaphysics and step into what scholastics called general physics. And don't worry, you won't need your calculator for this. It's not physics as we know it today, but more of a philosophical exploration of the natural world.
So less about equations and more about understanding the underlying principles governing nature. I'm intrigued.
Precisely. A central concept here is the notion of a predetermined hierarchy in nature, the great chain of being, as some called it. They believe that matter undergoes a series of transformations, striving towards higher forms of complexity and perfection.
Interesting. So unlike our modern concept of evolution, which embraces change and adaptation over time, they saw a fixed order to the natural world. Did this hierarchy influence how they viewed the world around them?
Absolutely. They believed that everything had its place in this grand scheme, from the simplest elements to the celestial spheres and ultimately culminating in God. It provided a framework for understanding the relationships between different beings and their roles in the universe.
That's a very different way of looking at the world than we do today. What are your thoughts on this concept of a fixed hierarchy in nature? Do you think it has any relevance in our modern understanding of the universe? Let us know in the comments below. Now, I understand that scholastic physics drew heavily from Aristotle, but they weren't always in complete agreement.
Yes. While they admired Aristotle, they weren't afraid to challenge his ideas when they saw fit. Remember, they were critical thinkers, not just followers.
Can you give us an example of where their views diverged?
One major point of contention was their understanding of celestial and terrestrial physics. Scholastics adopted the geocentric model of the universe, the idea that the Earth was the center, with the sun, moon, and stars revolving around it. This model was deeply ingrained in their worldview and shaped their understanding of cosmology.
So picture a universe with Earth as the heart surrounded by these celestial spheres, each influencing our world in unique ways. It's quite a different picture than our modern understanding of a vast expanding universe with Earth as just one planet among countless others.
Precisely. While this geocentric model has been superseded by modern astronomy, it's essential to understand it within the context of their time and the limited knowledge available.
Speaking of context, how did these philosophical views influence their ideas about the human mind? How do they approach the study of psychology?
That's a great question. Scholastic psychology is particularly fascinating because it dives deep into the nature of the soul, a concept that often gets overlooked in modern psychology. They placed a strong emphasis on the soul's immateriality and immortality.
Wait, so they believed in a soul that exists beyond the physical body. Tell me more.
Absolutely. And here's where they actually differed from Aristotle, who believed that only the active intellect, the part responsible for abstract thought, survived after death. Scholastics, however, argued that the entire soul, including its will, emotions, and memories, was immaterial and immortal.
So a much more comprehensive view of the soul and its destiny. What are your thoughts on this concept of an immaterial soul? Do you think it's compatible with modern science and our understanding of consciousness? We'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. Okay, so they believed in an immaterial soul, but how do they explain how we acquire knowledge?
They developed a sophisticated theory of knowledge centered around the concept of abstraction. Think of it this way. When you see a particular dog, like your neighbor's golden retriever, you're experiencing a specific individual thing. But your mind can also grasp the concept of dogness in general, extracting the essential qualities that make a dog a dog.
So we're able to move from individual concrete experiences to universal concepts that apply to a whole category.
Exactly. That's abstraction in action. Scholastics believed that this process allowed us to move beyond sense perception and grasp those deeper universal truths that underpin reality.
Fascinating. So it's not just about passively receiving information, it's about actively engaging with our experiences to extract meaning and understanding. I'm starting to see how their ideas about the soul and knowledge connect.
Yes, they saw a deep connection between the nature of the soul and its capacity for knowledge. They believed the soul, being immaterial, was able to transcend the limitations of the physical world and grasp those higher truths through reason and abstraction.
This all raises another question for me. If reason is so central to their worldview, what role did they see for the will, for our desires and choices? Was there any tension between the intellect and the will in scholastic thought?
That's a great question. And yes, there was definitely a debate about the relationship between intellect and will. Some thinkers, like Thomas Aquinas, leaned toward intellectualism. They argued that the intellect apprehends the good and the will naturally follows, choosing what reason dictates.
So in that view, reason is in the driver's seat guiding our actions towards what's good and true.
Precisely. However, others, like Duns Scotus, gave more prominence to the will, suggesting it had a certain freedom independent of the intellect. They believed that the will had its own unique power to choose, even if it wasn't always in line with reason's dictates.
So a more complex interplay between reason and desire, with the will potentially charting its own course.
Exactly. This tension between intellect and will gets to the heart of what it means to be human. Are we driven by logic and reason, or do our desires and passions play a more significant role in shaping our choices? It's a question that continues to be debated today. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think we're primarily driven by our intellect or our will? Share your perspective in the comments. We're all ears.
Okay, so even within scholasticism, there were diverse viewpoints and interpretations. It wasn't a monolithic system, but a vibrant intellectual conversation spanning centuries. But what about its relevance today? How do these ideas rooted in the Middle Ages connect to the modern world?
That's where we get into the fascinating realm of neo-scholasticism. Starting in the 19th century, we see a resurgence of these ideas as thinkers sought to revive and adapt scholastic principles to address the challenges of modernity.
So taking these core ideas and bringing them into dialogue with modern thought.
Precisely. And one of the key features of neo-scholasticism is its emphasis on metaphysical realism.
Meaning?
It means they hold that there is a real world that exists independently of our minds, and that we can come to know this world through our senses and our intellect. It's a pushback against more subjectivist or idealistic philosophies that question the reality of the external world.
Interesting. So in a world where everything seems increasingly subjective and relative, neo-scholasticism offers a grounding in objective truth and reality. That's a pretty bold stance in today's intellectual landscape.
It is. And this commitment to realism sets neo-scholasticism apart from many other modern philosophical schools. They believe that reason has the power to grasp the nature of reality and that there are objective truths that transcend individual perspectives.
Okay, so how do they bridge the gap between these medieval ideas and the modern world? What's the key to understanding both medieval and modern scholasticism?
Historical context is crucial. We need to appreciate the intellectual and cultural climate in which these ideas arose, both in the Middle Ages and in the modern era. It's not just about reading their texts, it's about understanding the conversations they were engaging in, the challenges they were responding to, and the broader historical forces at play.
So to truly grasp these ideas, we need to step back in time and see the world through their eyes, understanding the context that shaped their thinking. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And for neo-scholastic thinkers, this means engaging deeply with the history of philosophy, not just to defend their own system, but to understand the broader intellectual landscape and address the pressing questions of our time. They see the value in those timeless questions that have captivated philosophers for centuries, and they believe that scholasticism provides a robust framework for exploring those questions in a meaningful way.
So let's bring it all home. What are the implications of scholastic philosophy for modern life? Why should we care about these ideas today?
Scholastic thought has a lot to offer us, particularly in the realms of ethics, social issues, and the relationship between science and faith. It provides a robust framework for thinking about morality, justice, and the meaning of human existence.
And in a world grappling with complex ethical dilemmas and rapid scientific advancements, those insights seem more relevant than ever, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And what's truly valuable about scholasticism is its enduring emphasis on reason, objectivity, and the pursuit of truth. These are values that transcend any particular historical era and can guide us as we navigate the complexities of modern life.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the world of scholasticism. I hope our listeners have come away with a newfound appreciation for this often overlooked philosophical tradition. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more point. You mentioned that neo-scholasticism is distinct from Neo-Thomism. What's the difference?
Well, Neo-Thomism focuses specifically on the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, whereas Neo-Scholasticism draws from a broader range of medieval thinkers, including figures like Duns Scotus, William of Ockham, and Bonaventure.
So think of Neo-Thomism as a subset within the larger umbrella of Neo-Scholasticism.
Exactly. Both movements share a commitment to the principles of classical metaphysics and the value of reason. But Neo-Scholasticism embraces a wider range of perspectives and interpretations within that tradition.
Got it. So to wrap things up, it sounds like scholastic philosophy, both in its medieval and modern forms, offers a rich and complex intellectual tradition that continues to resonate today.
Absolutely. And while some might dismiss it as outdated or irrelevant, I think it has much to offer us today. Its emphasis on reasoned argumentation, its rigorous analysis of concepts, and its pursuit of a coherent understanding of reality are all valuable tools for navigating the complexities of the modern world.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the world of scholasticism, and I hope our listeners have come away with a newfound appreciation for this often overlooked philosophical tradition. So before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought. If scholastic philosophy, despite its medieval origins, still has valuable insights to offer the modern world, what might that tell us about the enduring power of human reason and the ongoing search for truth? That's all for this deep dive, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Until next time, keep those minds curious and stay intrigued.
It certainly does. And, exploring these different schools of thought within scholasticism reminds me of how diverse and dynamic this tradition really was. It wasn't just a monolithic system of thought, it was a vibrant conversation with different thinkers offering their own unique perspectives and interpretations.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to see how those conversations continue to resonate in modern philosophy. We've covered so much ground from metaphysics and physics to psychology and the nature of knowledge. But I'm curious, what are some of the specific ways that scholastic thought can inform our understanding of ethics and social issues today?
That's a great question. One area where scholasticism has a lot to offer is in the realm of natural law theory. This idea, rooted in ancient philosophy, but developed extensively by scholastic thinkers like Aquinas, argues that there are objective moral principles embedded in the very fabric of reality.
So it's not just about cultural norms or personal preferences. There are universal moral truths that apply to everyone everywhere.
Precisely. And these truths, according to natural law theory, can be discovered through reason and observation. For scholastics, the human capacity for reason wasn't just about understanding the world, it was also about discerning right from wrong and living in accordance with our true nature.
That's a powerful idea. It suggests that morality isn't arbitrary, but grounded in something deeper, something objective.
Exactly. And this natural law framework has had a profound impact on Western legal and ethical systems. Even today, many of our ideas about human rights, justice, and the common good have roots in these scholastic concepts.
That's fascinating. It makes you realize that these seemingly abstract philosophical ideas can have real-world implications shaping how we think about law, society, and the very foundations of morality.
Absolutely. Another area where scholastic thought is relevant today is in the ongoing dialogue between science and faith. Many scholastics, especially Aquinas, believed that reason and revelation weren't at odds with each other, but could actually complement and enrich one another.
So they didn't see science and religion as inherently conflicting forces, but rather as different ways of approaching truth.
Precisely. They saw both reason and faith as gifts from God, each offering unique insights into the nature of reality. And this perspective is particularly relevant today as we grapple with questions about the role of science, the limits of human knowledge, and the search for meaning in a seemingly secular world.
Yes, it's a perspective that encourages dialogue and understanding, rather than division and conflict.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there are different ways of knowing different paths to truth, and that both science and faith have valuable contributions to make to our understanding of the world and our place in it.
This has been a truly enlightening deep dive. We've explored the historical roots of scholasticism, delved into its core ideas, and discovered its surprising relevance to the modern world. And I think you've made a compelling case for why these ideas deserve our attention even centuries after their origins.
I completely agree. Scholasticism offers a rich and complex intellectual tradition that challenges us to think deeply, engage in reasoned debate, and strive for a more just and ethical world.
Well said. To our listeners, we encourage you to delve deeper into these ideas and explore the world of scholasticism for yourselves. You might be surprised by what you discover. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this deep dive. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the enduring relevance of scholastic thought in the comments below. Until next time, keep those minds curious and stay intrigued. Welcome back to Peak Intrigue, everyone. If you're loving these deep dives, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe.
Yes.
We're on part 9 of our 20-part series.
Wow.
And today, we're going to be tackling a really fascinating figure,
Okay.
Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West.
Right.
He's this incredible polymath who made waves in philosophy, medicine,
Oh, wow.
and even music. Get ready to have your minds blown.
Absolutely. His impact is undeniable. His medical textbooks were standard learning in European universities
Wow.
until the 18th century.
Crazy.
But to really kind of get into his genius, let's start with something that I think is really going to get your mental gears turning. The floating man thought experiment.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What's this floating man all about?
So imagine a man suspended in midair.
Okay.
He's completely deprived of all senses. No sight, sound, smell, touch, or even the feeling of his own body. No memories or connection to the outside world. The question Ibn Sina poses is this: would this man still be aware of his own existence?
Whoa, that's a real mind bender.
Yeah.
So you're saying this guy just suddenly pops into existence, floating in a void with absolutely zero sensory input.
Right.
That's kind of terrifying, to be honest.
It's definitely a radical scenario. It's designed to push our understanding of consciousness to the limit. But for Ibn Sina, the answer is a resounding yes. He argues that even without any sensory experience, the floating man would still possess self-awareness. It's like a fundamental part of our being, something that exists independently of the physical world.
So he's saying that there's more to us than just our bodies and senses, that there's this separate self that exists even without external input.
Yeah.
I can see how this gets into some pretty deep philosophical territory.
Exactly. And it's a core concept in Ibn Sina's philosophy, and it has major implications for how we understand the soul. What do you think about this idea? Does it resonate with you? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, it definitely raises some questions about the nature of consciousness.
Right.
If we can be aware of ourselves even without our senses,
Right.
what does that tell us about the relationship between our minds and bodies? Definitely something I'll be pondering for a while.
And that's the beauty of Ibn Sina's work. It challenges us to grapple with these fundamental questions. But let's not forget the man behind these ideas.
Yeah.
His life story is just as fascinating as his philosophy.
Oh, I've heard snippets. Didn't he memorize the entire Quran by the age of 10?
He did. That's incredible.
And by 16, he was mastering medicine. He even wrote an autobiography.
Wow.
Detailing his incredible journey of learning and discovery.
Okay, I'm hooked. What else can you tell us about his life? What kind of a person was he?
Well, he describes himself as someone consumed by a thirst for knowledge, spending countless nights poring over texts, fueled by lamplight, and interestingly enough, the occasional cup of wine.
Wait, wine. Wasn't he a devout Muslim? How does that fit in with Islamic teachings on alcohol?
I'm a bit confused here.
Yeah, you raise an important point, and it's crucial to remember that historical figures often operate within different cultural contexts. Ibn Sina likely adhered to the Hanafi school of Islamic law, which during his time held a slightly different perspective on alcohol. Fermented grape wine was strictly forbidden, but other types of alcohol were considered permissible as long as one avoided intoxication.
That clarifies things. It's so easy to impose our modern-day understandings on historical figures without considering the nuances of their time.
Right.
That's a trap I've fallen into myself. But getting back to Ibn Sina, Did he only leave us with thought experiments and intriguing biographical tidbits?
Right.
Or did he delve deeper into philosophical concepts?
He went much deeper. Ibn Sina wrote extensively on metaphysics, logic, and of course medicine.
Of course.
One of his groundbreaking contributions was his distinction between essence and existence.
Okay, I'm all ears,
Okay.
but could you break that down for me? I have a feeling those two words might trip me up if I'm not careful.
Of course. It's a simple idea with profound implications.
Okay.
Think of it this way. The essence of something is its whatness.
Mm-hmm.
It's the core nature of a thing, the qualities that make it what it is.
Okay.
So, for example, the essence of a table is its tableness.
Uh-huh.
Existence, on the other hand, refers to whether or not that thing actually exists in the world.
So I can understand the concept of blackness even if there's nothing black actually existing in front of me right now.
Precisely.
That's mind-blowing.
And this seemingly simple distinction revolutionized Islamic metaphysics.
Wow.
Thinkers like Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra built entire philosophical systems around it.
Wow, so it's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
A seemingly small idea can trigger a cascade of new thoughts and perspectives.
Right.
It makes me wonder, how did Ibn Sina apply this concept of essence and existence
Right.
to the bigger questions, like the existence of God?
That's a great question, and it leads us to what's known as Ibn Sina's proof of the truthful. This is his attempt to demonstrate the existence of God through logic and reason.
Okay, I'm ready for a philosophical deep dive. Take me through it.
All right, so the argument starts with the observation that everything we experience in the world is contingent.
Okay.
This means that its existence depends on something else.
Hmm.
For example, a flower depends on sunlight, water, and soil to exist.
Right.
Those things, in turn, depend on other factors and so on.
Okay.
It's like a chain of dependence.
So if we keep following this chain back,
Mm.
where does it lead? That's what I'm curious about.
That's the key. If everything we observe is contingent, dependent on something else,
Mhm.
there must be something that is not contingent.
Okay.
There must be a first cause,
Uh-huh.
a necessary existent that doesn't rely on anything else for its being. This uncaused cause, this ultimate source of all existence,
Right.
is what Ibn Sina identifies as God.
So it's like saying there has to be a starting point, a foundation upon which everything else rests.
And
I can see how that logic works. Did Ibn Sina's contemporaries accept this argument readily,
Right.
or did it spark debate?
It definitely sparked debate, especially among those who had different interpretations of God and creation.
Uh-huh.
In fact, Ibn Sina's views on the universe itself were quite controversial, particularly his idea that the universe is eternal.
Eternal. I mean, he believed the universe had no beginning
Yeah.
and will have no end. How did he reconcile that with the concept of God as a creator?
That's where things get even more interesting and where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
All right, cliffhanger.
Uh-huh.
You've definitely left me wanting more.
Did.
Don't forget, listeners, to share your thoughts on the floating man and the proof of the truthful in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. And be sure to join us for part 2, where we'll delve deeper into Ibn Sina's mind-bending ideas about the universe, creation, and the nature of knowledge itself. See you there.
See ya. Welcome back to Peak Intrigue. Let's pick up right where we left off,
Okay.
with Ibn Sina's controversial idea of an eternal universe.
Yes. I'm still reeling from that one.
Okay.
It seems to contradict the traditional understanding of creation. How did Ibn Sina square that concept with the existence of God?
It's a fascinating puzzle, and it challenges us to think beyond our usual assumptions about time and causation. Ibn Sina argued that for God to be perfect and unchanging,
Right.
creation couldn't have happened at a specific point in time. Instead, she proposed that the universe emanates eternally from God.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down a bit for me. Emanates eternally. What does that even mean?
Think of it like this. Imagine a lamp radiating light.
Okay.
The light doesn't have a separate beginning. It flows continuously from the source.
Right.
For Ibn Sina, the universe flows forth from God in a similar way.
Okay.
It's a constant, eternal process, not a one-time event.
So it's not like God flipped a switch and poof, the universe appeared.
Right.
It's more like an ongoing, ever-present act of creation.
Exactly. And this idea ties back to Ibn Sina's distinction
Okay.
between essence and existence. Right.
God's essence, according to Ibn Sina, is existence.
Right.
God doesn't have an essence that could be separate from his being. He simply is.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
So God's very nature is to exist,
Right.
and from that existence, the universe flows forth eternally.
You got it.
Yeah.
And this concept of emanation draws from Neoplatonism,
Okay.
a philosophical school that sought to synthesize the ideas of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato.
So we're seeing threads of ancient Greek thought woven into Ibn Sina's philosophy.
Yes,
It seems like he was drawing inspiration from a wide range of sources.
absolutely. He was a true master of synthesizing diverse ideas and building upon them. And this concept of emanation leads us to another fascinating element of Ibn Sina's thought,
Okay.
the hierarchy of intellects.
Okay. Hierarchy of intellects. Now we're getting into some seriously heady territory.
Uh-huh.
What exactly are we talking about here?
Imagine a chain of pure, intelligent beings, each emanating from the one above it.
The first emanation from God is the first intellect, a singular entity that contemplates both itself and God.
So the first intellect is like a mirror reflecting God's perfection.
A beautiful way to put it.
Okay?
And as the first intellect contemplates, it generates the second intellect and so on.
Okay.
This process continues down a chain of 10 intellects.
10 intellects. Wow, that's a lot of brain power.
It is.
And where do we fit into this grand cosmic scheme?
We're connected to the 10th intellect,
Okay.
also known as the active intellect.
Okay.
It governs the material world, the world we experience with our senses.
Okay.
And this active intellect plays a crucial role in how we gain knowledge.
Hold on, I'm getting some serious Matrix vibes here.
Uh-huh.
Is Ibn Sina saying we're all plugged into some kind of cosmic mainframe?
It's a powerful image and not entirely off the mark. Our souls, according to Ibn Sina, are in constant contact with this active intellect. It's through this connection that we receive knowledge of abstract concepts and universal truths.
So it's not just about what we learn through our senses,
Right.
but also about receiving insights from a higher intelligence.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
it is.
But how do we reconcile those two ways of knowing?
Ibn Sina believed that both empirical learning, which is learning through our senses, and receiving knowledge from the active intellect are essential for true understanding.
Okay.
Think of it like this. You're playing a video game, and as you explore the world, you uncover a map that reveals the larger structure of the game. The map represents the knowledge received from the active intellect.
Right.
It gives you a framework for understanding.
Okay.
But you still need to explore the world,
Yeah.
gather experience, and use your senses to fully grasp the game.
I love that analogy.
Good.
It makes this abstract concept of the active intellect much more relatable.
Right.
So we're constantly interacting with this higher intelligence, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Precisely. And this raises the question of the limits of knowledge. Even with access to the active intellect, our individual capacity to grasp and understand knowledge varies.
So some of us are better equipped to tap into this cosmic knowledge bank than others.
Yeah.
That seems a bit unfair.
Well, remember that Ibn Sina believed that true happiness and fulfillment lie in nurturing our intellects and seeking knowledge and understanding. So even if our capacities differ, we all have the potential to grow and expand our understanding. But even with this constant flow of knowledge from the active intellect, there are limits to what we can know. And interestingly, Ibn Sina argued that those limits apply even to God.
Wait, hold on. Limits on God's knowledge?
Yeah.
That's a bold claim, especially in a religious context.
It is. Ibn Sina made a distinction between knowing universals and knowing particulars.
Okay.
Universals are the overarching principles that govern existence, the fundamental laws of nature, if you will. Particulars, on the other hand, are the specific instances of those principles.
Right.
The individual events that unfold in the world.
So universals are like the blueprint of the universe.
Right.
And particulars are the individual buildings constructed from that blueprint.
Exactly. And Ibn Sina argued that God, being perfect and unchanging, can only know universals.
Okay.
To know particulars would imply change and limitation in God's knowledge,
Okay.
something Ibn Sina deemed impossible for a perfect being.
So God knows the rules of the game,
Right.
but not the specific moves of each player. That's a tricky concept to grasp. Could you give me an example?
Let's take eclipses.
Okay.
Knowing the laws of celestial mechanics allows you to know all eclipses, past, present, and future. But knowing each specific eclipse with its precise time and location would imply change and limitation in God's knowledge.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see it. God's knowledge is all-encompassing, but in a way that transcends the limitations of time and space. It's like knowing the code that generates the universe,
Right.
rather than knowing every single line of code.
You got it. And this brings us to another fascinating question. Was Ibn Sina secretly a mystic? Despite his reputation as a master of logic and reason,
Right.
there are hints of a mystical path in his later writings. What do you think? Could logic and mysticism coexist? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Wow, that's a big question to ponder. We've already covered so much ground, from
Whoa.
floating men to eternal universes to the limits of God's knowledge.
It's been quite the journey.
But you've definitely sparked my curiosity about this mystical side of Ibn Sina. I can't wait to see where this deep dive takes us next. Welcome back to Peak Intrigue listeners. We're on the final leg of our deep dive into the world of Ibn Sina, and I have a feeling things are about to get even more mind-boggling.
You're not wrong. We've explored Ibn Sina's ideas about the soul, the existence of God, and even his concept of an eternal universe. But there's this other layer to his thinking that often gets overlooked, his exploration of mystical experiences and the limits of human knowledge.
You mentioned earlier that there were hints of mysticism in his later writings.
Right.
I'm really curious to unpack that. It seems like a surprising twist for a philosopher known for his logic and reason.
It is surprising, and it's led to centuries of debate among scholars. But if we look closely at works like his Pointers and Reminders, known as the Isharat in Arabic, we find intriguing parallels with Sufi mysticism.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't familiar with Sufism, could you give us a little background? What are the key ideas here?
Sufism is a mystical tradition within Islam that emphasizes a direct experiential knowledge of God.
Okay.
It's about going beyond the outward rituals and dogma to seek a personal, transformative connection with the divine.
So it's less about following rules and more about inner experience and spiritual awakening.
Exactly. And in the Isharat, Ibn Sina outlines steps of spiritual ascent
Okay.
that are strikingly similar to those described by Sufi mystics. He talks about a journey of purification, contemplation, and ultimately union with the ultimate truth.
That sounds incredibly profound. But if he's advocating for this direct experience of truth, does that mean he thought reason and logic were ultimately insufficient?
That's a great question. Ibn Sina didn't reject reason. In fact, he believed it played a crucial role in our intellectual and spiritual development. But he also recognized that there are realms of understanding that go beyond the grasp of logic alone. He believed that the highest truths can only be experienced through direct witnessing, a realm where language falls short.
So it's not about abandoning reason,
Right.
but rather recognizing its limits. Kind of like using a map to guide you to a destination.
Exactly.
But ultimately, you have to step off the map and experience the place for yourself.
A perfect analogy. And this idea that ultimate truth transcends language is a key concept in mystical traditions across cultures.
It makes me wonder, did Ibn Sina himself have these kinds of mystical experiences? Did he ever claim to have reached this state of union with the divine?
He never explicitly confirms it, but there are tantalizing clues sprinkled throughout his work. For example, in his Epistle of the Bird, he uses this poetic allegory to describe a bird escaping captivity and embarking on a journey of spiritual liberation.
Oh, wow.
Many scholars see this as a metaphor for Ibn Sina's own mystical path.
So it's like he's embedding these hidden messages, inviting us to read between the lines and uncover deeper meanings.
Exactly, and it's this layering of meaning, this weaving together of logic and mystical insight that makes Ibn Sina so fascinating and endlessly intriguing. He pushes us to think beyond categories and to embrace the paradoxical nature of reality.
It's like he's saying, hey, don't box me in. I'm a philosopher, a physician, a logician, a mystic. I contain multitudes.
Precisely. And this multifaceted nature is reflected in his legacy.
Yeah.
While he faced criticism and even accusations of heresy in his own time,
Oh, wow.
his ideas continued to spread, influencing thinkers across cultures and centuries. He became known as the Prince of Physicians for his contributions to medicine, and his philosophical works laid the groundwork for some of the most influential thinkers in the West.
It's incredible to think that someone who was denounced as a heretic in his own time ended up shaping the course of intellectual history. What aspects of his thinking had the most significant impact?
His ideas about the nature of God, the soul, and the relationship between reason and revelation were particularly influential.
Yeah.
Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, who's considered a cornerstone of Catholic theology, drew heavily from Ibn Sina's work.
So even as he was being condemned in the East, his ideas were taking root in the West, shaping the very foundations of Western thought. That's a powerful testament to the enduring power of ideas.
It's a reminder that the most transformative ideas often transcend cultural and temporal boundaries.
Right.
And in Ibn Sina's case, his impact extends far beyond the realm of philosophy and medicine. He inspired works of literature, art, and even music.
It's amazing to think that his ideas resonated so deeply with people from such diverse backgrounds. What's a specific example of his influence in art or literature?
Ibn Tufail's philosophical novel, Hayb Nyasan, is a great example. It tells the story of a self-taught philosopher who, stranded on a deserted island, comes to understand the deepest truths of existence through reason and observation.
Wow.
The novel is deeply indebted to Ibn Tufail's ideas about the nature of knowledge, the soul, and the pursuit of truth.
So Ibn Tufail's legacy extends far beyond dusty academic texts.
Right.
He's woven into the very fabric of our intellectual and cultural heritage.
Absolutely. And that's what makes exploring his life and work so rewarding. It's a journey of discovery, a deep dive into a mind that was both brilliant and endlessly curious. He pushes us to question our assumptions, to expand our understanding of the universe, and to embrace the multifaceted nature of reality.
Well, folks, we've reached the end of our Ibn Sina deep dive. I hope you've enjoyed this journey as much as we have. It's been a whirlwind of ideas, ranging from floating men to eternal universes to the limits of God's knowledge. If you enjoyed this exploration, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Peak Intrigue for more mind-expanding deep dives. And remember, the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong adventure. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. Welcome back to Peak Intrigue. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. So today is part 10,
Nice.
our 20-part series on Hindu philosophy. We're diving deeper, and it is about to get really, really fascinating.
I'm excited.
So one of the things that always is really interesting to me about Hindu philosophy is that it has such an open structure. It encourages you to think for yourself and to debate and really kind of like get into these big questions. What do you think about that?
I think it's pretty unique. I think a lot of systems that people are familiar with are more rigid.
Yeah.
And so, can kind of have like a set of doctrines. And if you go outside that, then you're immediately met with resistance.
Right.
But Hinduism really has always fostered this diversity of different schools of thought.
Right.
And it's really more like a vibrant marketplace of ideas.
I love that. It's a great analogy. So, as we kind of navigate this marketplace of ideas, it's helpful to understand kind of like the broad categories that these schools of thought fall into.
Yeah.
And often we hear the terms orthodox and heterodox used to distinguish them. What comes to mind when you hear those terms?
Well, I think Orthodox people tend to associate it with, what's traditional.
Yeah.
Sticking to maybe what's established. And, in the context of Hindu philosophy, it means schools that accept the Vedas as their foundational scriptures. They see the Vedas as this, ultimate source of knowledge and wisdom.
Okay, so they're kind of like the traditionalists, the ones who hold on to that ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
What about the heterodox schools?
Heterodox schools are kind of the opposite in a way. They either reject the Vedas outright,
Right.
or don't see them as the absolute authority. And so they might draw inspiration from different sources or develop their own unique philosophies.
Right.
They may even challenge some of the fundamental premises of the Vedic worldview. So they're really branching out.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, they're going off the beaten path, exploring some uncharted territory, trying to find new things.
Exactly.
So within the orthodox schools, there are 6 prominent branches: Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purvamamamsa, and Vedanta,
Right.
each offering a unique lens through which to view the universe and our place in it. And on the heterodox side, we also have some really notable schools: Jainism, Buddhism, Charvaka, Ajivika, and Ajnana. So just to be clear, these categories, they're not meant to be these like really rigid boxes.
Right.
There's a lot of overlap and interaction between all these schools, and they've all contributed to this like rich tapestry of Hindu thought. It's almost like a family where everyone has their own, quirks and opinions, but they're all connected at a deeper level.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to think about it.
So now that we've kind of got a sense of the big picture, let's zoom in on one particular school and explore its unique perspective. How about we start with Mimamsa? This school seems to be all about rituals and regulations as a means to achieve our desires. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the Mimamsa philosophers were meticulous in their study of the Vedas,
Yeah.
particularly the portion that deals with the rituals and the sacrifices.
Right.
And they believe that the Vedas provide a precise blueprint for living a fulfilling life, and that by performing these rituals correctly, we can achieve all sorts of desirable outcomes,
Okay.
both in this life and the next.
So it's like a cosmic recipe book. If you follow these instructions carefully, you'll get the desired result, whether it's material wealth or good health or even, blissful afterlife. Mimamsa school seems to suggest that rituals are the key. But wouldn't that make life rather predictable? And maybe even, dare I say, a little boring?
Yeah, I get.
Where's the room for spontaneity and free will?
Yeah, and that's a question that the Mimamsa philosophers wrestled with too. They argued that, yes, rituals provide a structure for living a virtuous life,
Uh-huh.
but they don't negate free will. The choice to perform the rituals and the intention behind them ultimately lies with the individual.
Okay, so it's not just going through the motions.
Right.
There has to be a deeper understanding and a conscious choice to engage in these practices.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder, if the emphasis is on achieving specific outcomes through rituals, does the form of the ritual matter more than the intention behind it?
That's a good question.
What do you think?
I think that is something that's definitely worth pondering.
Yeah, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Buddhism.
Hmm.
This tradition, originated within Hinduism, but eventually branched out on its own, and it offers a very different perspective on life, suffering, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
So, Buddhism has always been kind of intriguing to me. It seems to be all about like letting go of attachments and finding peace amidst impermanence. But how exactly does that work? What are the key principles of that approach?
So I think at the heart of Buddhism is the recognition that life as we experience it is inherently filled with suffering.
Okay.
And this suffering arises from our attachment to things that are impermanent, constantly changing.
So it's like clinging to sandcastles on the beach, knowing that the tide is going to wash them away.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're setting ourselves up for disappointment
Right.
if we hold on to these things that we know can't last.
Right. And so Buddhism offers this path to liberation from that suffering through a combination of ethical conduct, meditation,
Yeah.
and right understanding.
Right.
And so it's not about escaping the world or denying the pleasures of life, but rather about cultivating a different way of relating to them.
Okay, so how does Buddhism address this idea of impermanence? I'm curious to know more about this concept of sunyata, or emptiness.
Sunyata,
Yeah.
it's often misunderstood. It's not about nihilism or the absence of everything,
Yeah.
but rather this recognition that all phenomena, including ourselves, are empty of inherent independent existence.
Well, it's like saying that things don't have a fixed, unchanging essence.
Exactly.
They're in flux, they're
Yeah.
interconnected, and they depend on so many other factors.
Yeah, precisely. And this understanding of emptiness is liberating because it allows us to let go of our clinging to those fixed identities, our grasping for permanence in a world that is constantly changing.
Yeah, so instead of fighting against the tide, we're learning to surf the waves of impermanence.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a nice image.
But wouldn't that lead to a sense of detachment and disengagement from the world? If nothing is permanent, what's the point of striving for anything?
Yeah, and I think that's a common misconception. Understanding impermanence doesn't lead to apathy or inaction. Instead, it allows us to engage with the world in a more mindful and compassionate way, so we can appreciate the beauty and preciousness of life without clinging to it, knowing that it's all part of this larger flow.
It's a perspective shifter, for sure.
Yeah.
So while Mimamsa focuses on achieving desires through rituals, Buddhism emphasizes detaching from desires and cultivating a deep understanding of the impermanent nature of reality.
Yeah.
Very different approaches.
Two very different approaches. It's really amazing how much diversity there is within Hindu philosophy.
Yeah, and it makes you appreciate just how nuanced and multifaceted this tradition really is. And we're going to dive even deeper into these nuances when we come back for part 2.
I'm ready. Yeah, it really is remarkable how they offer such contrasting, but, complementary perspectives.
Yeah.
It speaks to the depth and richness of Hindu philosophy.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of different approaches, I'm really curious to learn more about Advaita Vedanta. From what I understand, this school emphasizes knowledge and self-realization as the path to liberation.
Yeah.
So how does that contrast with the ritualistic approach of Mimamsa, or the focus on impermanence in Buddhism?
Right. So Advaita Vedanta takes a very different approach to
that's-
spiritual liberation, while Mimamsa focuses on the meticulous performance of rituals, and Buddhism emphasizes the understanding of impermanence. Advaita Vedanta puts the spotlight on knowledge,
Okay.
specifically the knowledge of the self.
So instead of external actions or contemplating impermanence, Advaita Vedanta is all about turning inward
Yes.
and understanding our true nature.
Exactly. Advaita Vedanta asserts that our true self, the Atman, is identical to Brahman,
Okay.
the ultimate reality, the ground of all being.
Wow.
And it's a non-dualistic perspective, meaning it sees no separation between the individual self and the universal self.
So it's like saying that we're not these like separate, isolated beings, but rather expressions of a single unified consciousness that permeates everything.
Precisely.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is a very mind-blowing concept.
Yeah.
And this realization of our true nature, of our oneness with Brahman, is what brings about true liberation, according to Advaita Vedanta.
Right.
It's about transcending this illusion of separation and experiencing the unity that underlies all of existence.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about all the conflicts and divisions that we see in the world.
Yeah.
If we truly understood this interconnectedness, perhaps we'd approach things a bit differently.
Right, absolutely.
And, remember that concept of sunyata, or emptiness, that we discussed in Buddhism?
Yeah.
Well, Advaita Vedanta offers kind of a contrasting perspective.
It does.
Instead of emphasizing emptiness, it focuses on the fullness of Brahman.
Yeah, the absolute reality that is the source of everything.
So Buddhism sees emptiness as the key to liberation, while Advaita Vedanta sees fullness as the ultimate truth.
Right.
Two seemingly opposite perspectives,
Yes.
yet both within the broader umbrella of Hindu philosophy.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, does denying existence lead to freedom, or does embracing fullness lead to truth?
That's a great question.
What are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments.
Yeah, what do you think?
Let's shift gears a bit and explore the Bhakti schools of Hindu philosophy.
Okay.
These schools take a different approach altogether, emphasizing love and devotion as the path to the divine.
Yes, very much centered on the heart.
Okay, so while Mimamsa is about rituals, Buddhism is about understanding impermanence, and Advaita Vedanta is about knowledge of the self, Bhakti is all about the heart,
Yeah.
cultivating that deep and loving relationship with a personal God.
Yeah, exactly. Bhakti traditions are all about the heart. They emphasize the importance of cultivating a deep personal relationship with the divine through practices like prayer, chanting, singing devotional songs, and acts of service.
It's like finding meaning and purpose in this relationship with something greater than ourselves.
Yeah.
Something that fills us with love and joy.
Yeah, and one of the beautiful things about the Bhakti schools is they acknowledge the diverse ways in which people can experience and express their devotion.
Okay.
There are different forms of bhakti, each emphasizing a different aspect of the divine-human relationship.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
It's not at all.
It's about finding the form of bhakti that resonates with your own heart
Right.
and your temperament.
Exactly.
Now, this brings us to a really fascinating concept in Bhakti philosophy, which is this idea that God responds to our devotion in a way that's tailored to our individual needs and aspirations.
Yeah.
In other words, the form of God that we connect with is often a reflection of our own inner state.
That's interesting.
So it's like saying that our understanding of ourselves, our feelings, our intentions, they all shape our spiritual journey and the way we experience the divine.
That's really profound.
It is. And speaking of inspiring concepts, let's delve into another fascinating aspect of Hindu philosophy that we've touched on briefly,
Okay.
which is its embrace of contradiction.
Yes.
Unlike some systems that strive for like absolute consistency and clarity, Hindu philosophy presents us with these seemingly paradoxical ideas
All right.
and really challenges us to go beyond the limitations of logic and reason.
Yeah, it really stretches our minds in a way.
So you're saying that contradictions are not something to be avoided,
Yep.
but rather embraced?
Yeah, embrace the paradox.
That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but there's a deep wisdom
Okay.
in this embrace of paradox. You see, the human mind, conditioned by the logic of the material world,
Yeah.
often struggles to grasp the vastness and mystery of the divine.
Right.
Our language, our concepts, even our way of thinking is designed to make sense of the finite and the tangible, but the divine, by its very nature, transcends these limitations.
It's like trying to capture the ocean in a teacup.
Yeah, exactly.
Our minds just can't contain the immensity of the divine.
Right. And so this is where paradox comes in. Paradox, by definition, is a statement that seems contradictory but might nonetheless be true.
Right.
And it challenges our habitual ways of thinking. It forces us to confront those limitations of our logic and to open ourselves up to a wider range of possibilities.
Oh, instead of seeing contradiction as a problem to be solved, Hindu philosophy embraces it as a doorway to a deeper level of understanding.
Yes.
It's like saying, hey, there's more to reality than meets the eye.
Right.
Don't get stuck in your limited ways of thinking. Open up to the mystery.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not about rejecting logic or reason altogether.
Right.
But it's about recognizing the limits of these tools and being willing to go beyond them.
Okay.
It's about cultivating what we might call divine vision.
Divine vision.
A way of seeing that embraces both the logical and the paradoxical, the finite and the infinite.
So instead of trying to like force everything into these neat and tidy categories.
Right.
We have to be willing to hold these seemingly contradictory ideas simultaneously.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that lead to confusion and uncertainty?
Sure.
How can we make sense of the world if we're constantly grappling with paradoxes?
Yeah, those are great questions.
Let us know down in the comments.
It can be challenging. It requires a certain level of intellectual humility
Okay.
and a willingness to let go of our need for absolute certainty.
It's like a shift in perspective, a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones
Exactly.
and explore the unknown.
Yeah, and this willingness to embrace paradox isn't unique to Hindu philosophy.
Right.
We find it in various mystical traditions throughout the world.
Like what?
Think about Zen koans, those paradoxical riddles designed to provoke a breakthrough in understanding.
Okay.
Or the mystical poetry of Rumi, which often dances between these seemingly contradictory ideas.
Yeah, so like Cohen's, what is the sound of one hand clapping? That forces us to kind of confront the limitations of our conceptual thinking.
Exactly.
And Rumi's poetry often expresses this kind of paradoxical nature of love.
Right.
The union of opposites.
Yes, absolutely. It's like saying, don't get stuck in the map.
Yeah.
Venture into the uncharted territory and experience the terrain for yourself.
Love it.
So as we delve deeper into specific schools of Hindu philosophy, we'll encounter numerous examples of this embrace of paradox, and we'll see how seemingly contradictory ideas can coexist and even complement each other, offering different facets of a truth that transcends our limited human understanding.
It's so cool. I can already see how this idea of embracing contradiction can lead to a more, nuanced and expansive view of reality.
Right.
It's like realizing that life is not a black and white photograph, but rather a vibrant tapestry woven from these threads of different colors and textures. Yeah, so let's continue to unravel those threads and explore the practical implications of all this.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that, with all these different schools of thought that we've explored, we've really only just begun to scratch the surface of Hindu philosophy.
Yeah, it's such a vast and intricate system with so many layers to uncover.
And as we wrap up this deep dive today, I want to kind of shift our focus from the theoretical to the practical.
Okay.
Because Hindu philosophy isn't just about intellectual understanding.
It's about transformation.
It's about embodying that wisdom in our lives.
Exactly.
So it's not enough to just read about these concepts or debate them, in a philosophical forum.
Right.
We have to put them into practice to live them out in our daily lives. But with so many different paths and practices, to choose from, where do we even begin?
Well, that's a great question, and it highlights the importance of discernment in navigating this vast landscape of Hindu philosophy. It's like being in a supermarket with endless aisles of choices.
How do we know what's right for us?
Right. We don't just grab random items off the shelves without considering our needs and preferences.
Right.
So how do we apply that same discernment to our spiritual journey?
Well, Hindu philosophy offers this toolbox filled with practical techniques and practices designed to cultivate specific qualities and move us towards greater spiritual maturity. Whether it's the rituals of Mimamsa, the meditation practices of yoga and Buddhism, the self-inquiry of Advaita Vedanta, or the devotional practices of Bhakti. These are not just abstract ideas, but pathways for inner transformation.
So it's like having a map and a compass to guide us on our journey.
Exactly.
But even with a map and compass, we can still get lost or disoriented if we don't know how to use them properly.
That's true.
So how do we ensure that we're choosing the right tools and using them effectively?
Well, in Hindu tradition, there's the concept of the guru.
Right.
And the guru is not just a teacher, but a spiritual guide who can help us navigate the complexities of the path.
Right.
A true guru can assess our individual needs and guide us towards the practices and teachings that are most appropriate for our stage of development.
So it's like having a personal trainer for our spiritual growth. Someone who can help us create a customized workout plan that aligns with our goals and abilities.
Exactly. A true guru can help us avoid the pitfalls of getting caught up in dogma.
Right.
Or blindly following teachings that are not beneficial. They can help us develop discernment. That ability to distinguish what is truly nourishing for our spiritual growth. And what might be hindering us.
So instead of trying to figure everything out on our own, we can benefit from the wisdom and experience of someone who has already walked the path.
Exactly.
It's like having a mentor. Who believes in us and supports us.
And supports us in becoming the best versions of ourselves.
It makes me think of all the different paths that we've explored today.
Yep.
From the rituals of Mimamsa to the self-inquiry of Advaita Vedanta, each path offers a unique set of tools and practices.
Yeah.
But it's the guidance of a guru that can help us choose the right tools for the job, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive.
Oh, wow. It flew by
I know.
into the vast and multifaceted world of Hindu philosophy. We barely scratched the surface.
Just the tip of the iceberg.
But hopefully we've sparked your curiosity,
Yeah.
inspired you to explore further.
And just to appreciate the depth and the diversity of human spiritual exploration.
It's been an incredible journey for sure, filled with mind-bending concepts,
Yeah.
thought-provoking insights,
So much to think about.
and a renewed appreciation for this tradition.
Yeah.
So as we conclude our dive today, I'm left with this sense of awe
Yeah.
and wonder
Mhm.
at the richness of this tradition. So keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep exploring. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives.
We'll see you next time.
Until next time.